Chapter 1644 The Living Creatures Inside the Mystery Realm. Chapter 1644 The Living Creatures Inside the Mystery Realm. The spiritual chi here was too abundant, and even an eternal river tier elite would feel discomfort. This was really exaggerated. The two women of the Long tribe were still in a state of shock from the information that they had just found out, and Ling Han and his two companions began to walk ahead. They had all become saints, so they could cultivate at any time. Their bodies absorbed the spiritual chi, continuously turning it into their own origin power. The stars inside their bodies were either expanding or forming from nothing. It was very quiet here. There was only a dense forest, and no animals existed. There were also no cries of insects, as if this was a world that contained only vegetation. They did not know where they should go, so they climbed towards the mountain peak to see exactly how tall this mountain peak was. Slightly less than half a day later, they were still unsuccessful. There was still a very, very far distance separating them from the summit. Now that they had arrived here, there was a very strong pressure that caused even them to feel strained, especially Long Xiangyue, who was already covered with sweat. However, she was extremely headstrong. She gritted her teeth, and did not request that they stop for a short rest. Long Yushan naturally could not bear to see this, and drew her into her own spatial god tool. Otherwise, even if she forced herself to bear with it, she would only be hindering everyone else's speed. Ling Han did not say anything, and was presently walking ahead. Suddenly, his heart clenched, and he struck out with a palm strike, pressing down on Long Yushan. "What is the meaning of this?" Though Long Yushan had not had her guard up, the reaction speed of a saint was very fast. Her right hand instinctively formed a block in front of her, parrying Ling Han's attack, but she was still sent back 30 meters by this strike. And this was still because Ling Han had not used his full strength. Otherwise, with his usual battle prowess of a middle-stage Saint King, he would be able to kill Long Yushan with a single strike. Ling Han did not explain, because there was no need to. Boom! A dark shadow scrambled out, pouncing at Ling Han and his group. Its target was where Long Yushan had previously been standing. Humph! The notionless saint immediately moved. He drew a treasured saber, and slashed out at that dark shadow. It was forged from the saintly material that Ling Han had bestowed on him. Previously, Ling Han had obtained a considerable amount of saintly material and saint tools from the treasure trove of the Heavenly River King. He had given the majority of it to his brothers, disciples, and friends. At first, there were not that many, so there were not enough to be divided among all of them. Wang, the precious saber glowed, multiple patterns appearing. The aura of great Tao was entwined around it, possessing astonishing might. The notionless saint was a veteran saint, after all. He had long since forged the saintly material into a weapon, and after he became a saint, he nurtured it day and night, instilling his own martial intent into the weapon, and a basic saint tool was formed. That dark shadow missed the target of its pounce, and reacted extremely quickly. Suddenly it swiped out with a claw, smacking over at the precious saber. Ping! A large boom rang out. The dark shadow was sent backwards, and the notionless saint also stumbled. He stepped back repeatedly for over 20 steps. What surprised Ling Han was that the heaven and earth here were surprisingly sturdy. Under the impact of the resulting shock wave, a part of the vegetation had been turned into fine powder, but the mountain itself was not damaged at all. Long Yushan naturally knew that she had wronged Ling Han, but her personality was a very proud one, so she did not apologize to Ling Han. She only turned to look at that dark shadow. It was a black panther. It was not very big, only about 3 meters long and about 1.5 meters in height. Its tail, though, was extraordinarily long as it reached a total 9 meters in length, and as its tail waved, they could see that there was actually a snake's head at the tip of its tail, presently flicking out a forked tongue. Which exactly was the real head here? Long Yushan humphed coldly, and immediately charged towards that strange black panther. The bloodline of the dragon tribe surged. She was very aggressive, and shot out a punch that took the form of a dragon's head, releasing the howl of a dragon. The true dragon belonged to the 9 heavens, and to the majority of divine beasts in the world, it possessed a strong suppression ability. Unless the gap in cultivation level was too large, they would definitely be affected. Yet this Black Panther was completely unafraid of the dragon's might. Instead, it was as if it had been provoked. It bared its fangs, its two canines long and sharp, and there were actually densely covered patterns appearing on them, as if they were saint tools. It charged to attack Long Yushan, depending on the burst of power from its forelegs. Its speed instantly exceeded the limits, becoming indescribably fast. Pooh! It brandished its front paw, and there were also patterns glowing on it, forcefully tearing a hole through Long Yushan's attack. It aggressively barged in, and bit ruthlessly at her wrist. With how sharp its fangs were, Long Yushan's wrist would probably be bitten off with this one bite. It would be like being severed directly by a saint tool, and Long Yushan was only a small saint, so how could she possibly manage to block this strike? Ling Han's figure suddenly moved, and with his use of lightning flash, his speed was actually even faster than the Black Panther. On the brink of crisis, he stood in front of Long Yushan, and stretched out his own hand. With a hoo, the Black Panther had bitten Ling Han's wrist. Long Yushan couldn't help but gasp, and she didn't know what she was feeling at this moment. Previously, Ling Han had already dissipated an attack for her, but she did not appreciate his kindness, and instead even rebuked Ling Han. But what did he do? Repaying her misdeed with kindness. Not only did he not make a fuss over her mistake, he even blocked another strike for her, even if it was at his own cost. Though the broken limb of a saint could be regrown, what was important was this friendly regard. She was very strongly touched, but this feeling immediately turned into shock because the Black Panther actually could not manage to bite off Ling Han's wrist. Instead, its teeth were shaking, and there was blood surging from its gums. If it was not that the Black Panther's teeth were as sturdy as saintly material, probably the shock would even snap its two sharp fangs off. Are you still ing human? Long Yushan looked at Ling Han in shock. She knew that there were some that concentrated on cultivating their physique, but which of them could be compared to Ling Han? This was equivalent to stretching out his hand to be directly severed by a saint tool, yet almost causing the saint tool to shatter from the strike instead. The Black Panther was also confused. It couldn't even feel the existence of its fangs. They were limp and numb to the extent of almost falling out. It leaped back, its legs slightly bent, and its body slightly lowered. Its eyes focused fixedly on Ling Han, looking like it would attack at any moment. Strange, Ling Han said. This is definitely a demonic beast in the low extreme of the Genesis tier, yet did not actually gain intelligence, and only has its primitive instincts of slaughter. This was inconceivable. Ordinarily, once they had cultivated the mountain river tier, demonic beasts could even take human form, what more something as simple as gaining intelligence. Yet this Black Panther was already in the Genesis tier, and belonged in the top tier of the immortal realm, but it only had its bloodthirsty instincts. This is indeed strange. The notionless saint nodded. However, its battle prowess is extremely strong, and it can be considered a king tier among small saints. He and Long Yushan had both exchanged blows with this Black Panther. Though it had only been a single exchange, it was enough for them to form their own judgment. But what was a king tier among small saints worth to Ling Han? He moved. Boom! As his hand stretched out, stars appeared, as if a new world had been formed. The Black Panther was instantly so scared that all its fur was standing on ends. Suddenly, it turned around, and swiftly fled. Unfortunately, in front of Ling Han, even Saint Tyr's speed was not enough. Pa! The Black Panther was instantly subdued, and flopped onto the ground, its limbs stretched wide. It was releasing low growls, but even so it was still showing its vicious nature as if it wanted to swallow Ling Han, its wild nature on full display. Chapter 1645. Chapter 1645, Interaction. Interesting, Ling Han said softly, and with a thought he had drawn the Black Panther into the Black Tower. Even if your power is Saint Tyr, so what? Having entered into the Black Tower, it belonged to him now. Meanwhile, Long Yushan was stunned. Ling Han actually just took a saint-tier demonic beast into his spatial god tool just like that. Weren't you afraid that this Black Panther would suddenly go on a vicious rampage and destroy that spatial god tool of yours? Oh, spatial god tools were not saint tools. Aside from being able to contain living creatures, they might not be all that much sturdier than normal spatial spirit tools. Why did that panther not gain intelligence? The heavenly phoenix divine maiden was also very curious. Ling Han hummed for a while, and then said, "Our human race is called the most intelligent of all life, but if one has been living in a forest that is completely remote and removed from everything else since childhood, then he may possibly survive, but his intelligence would definitely be very low, and he would probably only be left with the instincts to live, right? But this Black Panther can cultivate. Being able to cultivate to such heights, how could it possibly still be so primitive?" The heavenly phoenix divine maiden did not agree with such an explanation. "Perhaps its bloodline is strong enough. As long as it could grow naturally, it would be Genesis tier," Ling Han stated slowly. Gasp! The heavenly phoenix divine maiden and the others all inhaled sharply at the same time. That was too frightening, wasn't it? It would be in the Genesis tier if it matured naturally. So how terrifying would this breed be? If there were slightly more of their number, then wouldn't they be capable of conquering the whole immortal realm? Ling Han shook his head and said, "It should be the unique environment here. The spiritual chi here is too dense, which gave rise to such conditions. Of course, the bloodline of that Black Panther must be of a very high grade as well. Perhaps it has an ancestor in the severing mundane tier or even dividing soul tier. It is a demonic beast, after all. It does not have the learning ability and strong adapting ability of humans, but in terms of bloodline inheritance, it has more of an advantage." The heavenly phoenix divine maiden and the others accepted that kind of explanation. Incomparable conditions for cultivation added with bloodline inheritance indeed could create such an elite that only knew slaughter and bloodshed. "Is the whole celestial realm that frightening?" Long Yushan asked. True dragons should be superior to millions and millions of living creatures, but now in a condition of equal cultivation levels, her dragons might actually did not have the slightest effect on the Black Panther, which meant that the latter's cultivation level was not inferior to hers at all. This was a considerable blow to her superiority complex that had developed through the years. Ling Han and the others shook their heads. They hadn't gone to the celestial realm before, and had only heard that there were even more elites there. Genesis tiers basically could only be considered ants there. It was like one that had come from a small world. What was a shattering void tier worth? For cultivators, this was a choice. You could proclaim yourself ruler in a small world, but the price for that would be your lifespan. A shattering void tier could only live for around 1,000 years, but once they advanced to the mountain river tier, their lifespan would immediately spike to 100,000 years. Who knows how many demonic beasts there are here that are like this Black Panther? The heavenly phoenix divine maiden said. Then, she turned to look at Ling Han, her expression filled with worry. If there were Saint King level beings, then even with the strength of the Empress and the Rain Emperor, they could only flee. They hadn't come back out even after so many years. One possibility was that they had found some great fortune here, and another was that they had encountered grave trouble. Ling Han nodded. He wanted to divine the whereabouts of the Empress, but there was a mysterious force here that was concealing the twists of fate, so he was completely unable to divine it at all. If this truly was a part of the celestial realm that had fallen, then what would Genesis tiers be worth in the celestial realm? It was absolutely normal that he was incapable of making a divination. They continued on their way up the mountain, but they still did not see other signs of life in the surrounding area. It was as if all the demonic beasts had been killed by that Black Panther from before. There was also day and night here, but it was not light at day and dark at night. Instead, there was half the time that the skies would be golden, and the skies would be silvery the other half of the time. It was unknown which was day and which one was night. There was no sun, no moon, and no stars. There was only the continuous range of mountains that seemed to have existed for eternity. We'll just consider the golden time as day, and the silvery time as night. A day passed, and they all felt weary, so they stopped for a rest. This was very inconceivable. They were all saints, and they would actually feel tired after journeying for a day. It should be known that Ling Han had battled fiercely with the Open Clouds King for 4 years straight, and hadn't he still come out of it filled with energy and zest? It could only be said that this place was very amazing. Long Yushan released Long Xiangyue from the spatial god tool, while Ling Han drew out ingredients from the Black Tower, which he handed over to the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden and the other women to cook. Not too long after, a fragrant aroma was released, greatly exciting their appetites. After a simple meal, Ling Han and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden entered into the Black Tower, and Long Yushan and her niece did not suspect anything. They had all reached Saint Tier, so wouldn't it be very normal for them to have spatial god tools? She and Long Xiangyue also entered into her spatial god tool. She wanted to have a good talk with this niece of hers. Xiangyue, that man could not possibly like you. You had best sever this ill-fated affection as soon as possible to avoid being wounded too deeply, she said. Long Xiangyue pouted. After a while, she softly said, I know. He has a wife that is indescribably beautiful, so it is absolutely normal that he can't appreciate such a commonplace woman as myself. Hearing these words from her, Long Yushan was not satisfied, and she said, Even if that person does not like you, you do not have to feel inferior. With your qualifications, you would qualify as a match for any man in this world. Long Xiangyue shook her head. Auntie, you haven't seen that Empress before. She is really a peerless beauty. If I was a man, I would definitely fall for her as well. There is really no comparison. Long Yushan was astonished. For exquisite beauties like themselves, they would admit that they were inferior to others in cultivation level. But in the area of beauty, they had absolute confidence in themselves, and thought that even if there were others that matched their beauty, it was impossible any who surpassed them existed. Long Xiangyue was actually completely bowled over by that so-called empress, which naturally made her feel very surprised. Just how beautiful could she be that Long Xiangyue would admit that she was inferior? Auntie, why don't we marry Ling Han together? Long Xiangyue suddenly suggested shockingly. Long Yushan. On our own, we have no advantage, but it would be different if we are together. Both aunt and niece are two beautiful flowers, so who would not want to pluck these two exquisite blooms? The more Long Xiangyue said, the more daring she became. Only with that would we be able to barely compete with that empress. You're babbling nonsense. Long Yushan suddenly rebuked. Auntie, don't tell me that you have no feelings for him. Long Xiangyue threw everything to the winds. If you like him, you should pursue him. If you missed him, that would be a real pity. Don't tell me that you want to regret not having been more courageous today when you're old. Damn girl, don't say any more. Long Yushan rebuked. This was really utterly ridiculous. She actually wanted both aunt and niece to marry the same person. Just the mere thought of it made her furious. Long Xiangyue did not reply, but her expression was stubborn. This was the only possibility that she could think of that would make Ling Han interested in her. The journey is long, so let us just slowly wait. Even if you are a proud woman, we can slowly grind your pride away. Long Yushan did not know that this niece of hers was digging a trap for her presently. She was only vexed. This girl had really sunk deep into the mud. She was almost close to madness. She also firmed her resolve. She was determined to pull Long Xiangyue back to her senses. The two women exchanged a look, both of them wearing an expression of determination. Chapter 1646 Summit Giant. Chapter 1646 Summit Giant. Ling Han had a pleasant and wonderful night. He and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden were lovey-dovey and hands-on with each other, and with his tireless effort, he unlocked a few more positions with the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden, which intensified his interest. He really wanted to have a more in-depth study of the subject with the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden in the Black Tower. Unfortunately, they had not come here on a romantic retreat. After a night of rest, all of them were energized. The spiritual chi here was really too dense. Even if only a single day had passed, their improvement was still obvious. They continued their journey. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Because there were no longer any attacks from demonic beasts like the Black Panther, they were not delayed. Their speed was still very fast, and they could finally see the summit by the 4th day. Being able to see the summit and arriving at the summit was naturally two different things, and when they saw the summit, all of them were stunned. That was because this mountain peak had actually been severed in half. From the part that had been severed, it could be deduced that there should still be a very great distance until the non-existing mountain top, so when this mountain had been whole, just how tall would it have been? This was too astonishing. Ling Han and his group all shook their heads. They had never seen any mountain peak in the immortal realm that could reach such a height. This was practically melding a great star into the shape of a mountain peak. When this thought streaked through their minds, they all started, and then exchanged a look. This was not impossible. From afar, they could already feel the pressure that emanated from the summit. That was a stronger aura than a saint's. There was merely a slight wisp, and it was enough to make them feel as if their saintly bodies were about to crumble. Long Xiangyuan naturally couldn't bear it, and Long Yushan drew her inside her spatial god tool. After they traveled to a higher level, even the heavenly phoenix divine maiden, the notionless saint, and Long Yushan could not bear it any longer. They could only stop and watch as Ling Han continued to ascend the mountain. Ling Han traveled for several thousand miles, and his footsteps were also beginning to slow down. Now that he had come this far, even he dared not make any large movements. The pressure here was too terrifying. Thus, the slightest breeze could turn into a frighteningly destructive blade of wind. With one strike from this blade, even Ling Han's skin would be sliced open. Thankfully, his godly bones were even sturdier, and this was not enough to kill him. The indestructible heaven scrolls circulated, and he healed his injuries as he continued his way up the mountain. He was an extremely curious person, and was determined to see what was exactly there on top of the mountain. He traveled for another 1,000 and more miles. Ling Han took every step with great difficulty. Even the weakest footstep could create a frightening blade of wind that would shatter his godly bones upon first contact. He could only make it this far. Ling Han stopped, and focused his origin power completely on his eyes. The Eye of Truth activated, and he looked towards the summit. With his present cultivation level, the Eye of Truth was actually not very useful anymore. But no matter what, it was still a mystical power, so using it would still definitely be slightly better than not using it. Far in the distance, the scene that was initially vague slowly became clearer, and he could just barely make out something there. Ling Han narrowed his eyes. His sight penetrating such a pressured space would have great negative effects on him as well. He felt a great pain in his eyes, as if he was about to be blinded. He did not give up. Instead, he focused even more origin power into his eyes. Humph! He suddenly turned around, and tears of blood were actually streaming from his eyes as he felt a sharp pain in them. He hurriedly channeled the indestructible heaven's scroll, and under its repeated healing, he finally felt that his eyes had recovered slightly. However, he had ultimately glimpsed the scene at the mountain top, though it was just a single glimpse. Where the mountain peak was broken off, there was a black-colored rock. There was no tree nor a single blade of grass, and in the most central position of the broken peak, a person was seated on the ground. He was incredibly tall as 3,000 meters, his whole body green as if he was a tree himself. This person was extremely strange. The upper half of his body was indeed human in form, yet he had a pair of massive bull horns, but from the chest downwards, he had the form of a deer, with an additional 4 limbs. Whether it was the deer part or the human part, they were covered with multiple green-colored seals that exuded an endless air of life and vitality. Yet this person was dead. There was a hole in his forehead. It was not very big, possibly about as wide as a single finger's width, but it was this hole that immediately drew Ling Han's gaze. Though Ling Han had only caught one glimpse, he had spent half of it on looking at this injury. It seemed to have an endless attraction to him, and he couldn't help but stare at it. And it was this hole that had taken the life of this green-colored giant. Having his spirit pierced, so what if his body was still unscathed? This giant with the body of a deer had a green-colored blood flowing from him, and it was this that nurtured all the plants that covered the whole mountain. Perhaps the forest of the whole mountain range had been nurtured from his blood. This person had to have cultivated wood element regulations, and that was why his vitality seeped out and turned this mystery realm into an ocean of vegetation after he had died. Of course, it was also because of him that such pressure that even saints could not possibly approach the summit filled this area. Ling Han recalled the last detail that he had seen. It was not that there was completely no vegetation on the mountain top. There was actually an incredibly small plant by the side of the giant with a deer's body. It was less than a foot tall, and had sprouted a verdant fruit. He did not know what fruit it was, but he was absolutely sure that being able to grow in such an environment, it definitely had to be celestial medicine. Unfortunately, he could not obtain it. Ling Han sighed. This was really too cruel. The celestial medicine was right in front of his eyes, yet he could only look at it helplessly and sigh. However, he was a man that could go with the flow. Immediately, he turned around and headed down the mountain. The most important goal for him now was to find the Empress and the others. When he found them, then he would consider how he was to obtain that celestial medicine. Ling Han turned around and left, but he had not traveled very far when he got a very strange feeling. He stopped, and this kind of feeling abruptly vanished. He set out again, but it was only a while, and the strange feeling had returned. He swiftly walked down the mountain, and the farther he went, the weaker and weaker the blades of wind became, which allowed him to use movement techniques and not be sliced into pieces by those wind blades. He used lightning flash, and his speed reached the true limits of the immortal realm. His speed could match the speed of a heavenly tribulation. And as expected, that strange feeling disappeared once more. He stopped, and thought, could it be that there is something following me? Otherwise, there was no other way to explain that strange feeling. He once again set out, but not too much time had passed, and that feeling actually came back again. Ling Han suddenly turned around, but there was absolutely nothing behind him. There was only a wide expanse of trees, and that strange feeling had again vanished at the same time. This was too strange. Ling Han turned back around, and walked at a very slow speed. After he had walked for at least 30 minutes, he suddenly made a rapid turn, used lightning flash, and streaked in the direction behind him. In that instant, Ling Han's expression involuntarily became incredibly strange because he finally discovered the source of that strange feeling that he had been getting. He had indeed been followed, but the culprit was not a human, nor was it a demonic beast. Instead, it was a bone. It was more than a foot long and completely snow-white. It stood upright as if it had 2 legs, and the instant it saw Ling Han swiftly return, it actually looked like it was about to turn and break into a run. Chapter 1647 Bone. Chapter 1647 Bone. A bone as white as jade was actually following him. Ling Han couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. This was really too ridiculous. Furthermore, this bone was really too human. It actually knew to hide from him, and it really had hidden successfully. If Ling Han had not turned around all of a sudden like this, he definitely would not have been able to seize it. Had it come alive? Ling Han descended, and was only about 3 meters away from that bone, but he did not make a move. Even if it was only a bone, he could still feel a terrifying aura from it, so he did not dare to make any rash movements. The bone also seemed to be looking at him. Then, it shook its body, and actually slowly buried itself in the ground as if it was going to pretend that Ling Han had not discovered it, and was planning to make its getaway. "Hey, I saw you!" Ling Han declared with a smile. Otherwise, he really didn't know what kind of attitude he should adopt towards such a strange bone. The bone suddenly popped back up, as if it had gotten a scare. It could be seen that its body had actually bent, clearly expressing its shock. This? Ling Han began to break out in a cold sweat again. Could anyone tell him what was going on exactly with this bone? "Can you speak?" he asked, and when he asked this question, even he himself felt it was a strange question to ask. "Can you speak?" Unexpectedly, this bone really replied. However, it was not speaking verbally, but rather communicating through divine sense. It seemed like an infant that was just learning to speak, its voice incredibly soft and childish. "My name is Linghan, do you have a name?" Linghan asked. "My name is Linghan." The bone repeated Linghan's words again, but its speed was considerably slower. Linghan could feel a headache coming on. This bone seemed to have somehow gained consciousness and become intelligent, yet it was in the beginning stage of just starting to understand. Thus, it didn't even know how to speak, and knew only to repeat his words. He sighed, and sat cross-legged on the ground. The bone did not move, but it was visible that its upper half slightly bent, as if it was slanting its head to one side. Then it too wanted to sit down, but it did not have legs to cross, so it could only bury half the bone into the ground so that it, too, looked like it was sitting down. This was like a puppy that was imitating those around it. Linghan talked with it, and did not touch on any important topics. He only wanted it to have more contact with words, hoping that it could truly have its own voice. "Yaya, yaya!" Half a day later, the bone finally was no longer continuing to copy his words, and said a phrase that belonged to it alone, yet it was completely meaningless. But it seemed very happy. "Yaya, yaya!" it repeated endlessly. "Can you speak now?" Linghan asked. "Can you speak now?" "Yaya!" the bone replied happily. Fine, it was a waste of his breath to even ask. However, this bone was not so afraid of him now, so Linghan could approach closer and examine it more clearly. This bone was considerably extraordinary. It was nothing so simple as having gained intelligence. The bone was not only snow white, it was also jade-like, not having the slightest feeling of malice, as if it was a delicate piece of art, yet the tastes of that Grand Master that had made it were too weird, and that was why he had made it into the shape of a bone. On the surface of the bone, there were multiple patterns that were extremely complicated. Linghan only looked at them for a while, and he was already dizzy. They were even harder to comprehend than the celestial formation he had obtained. What relation did this bone have with that celestial corpse on the summit? It was only when Linghan was descending the mountain that he gained that strange feeling. This bone should have appeared when he had been spying on that celestial corpse. It probably sensed Linghan's gaze, and had thus followed him all the way here. Others could not have reached that kind of height, so they naturally could not have possibly alerted this bone. The bone was a part of that celestial corpse, and had somehow gained consciousness? Was he a magnet for trouble? Linghan reflected on himself. The ancient sites that others went to were all normal, but when it was him, there was practically none that was actually normal. "Do you eat anything?" Linghan drew out some food to eat, and took out a portion, which he placed in front of the bone. The bone looked at it with a cocked head, and very much wanted to eat like how Linghan was eating, but it did not have any mouth, and so could not eat in the same way at all. It was so anxious that it began to call out, "Yaya," again, yet was completely helpless. It seemed to have been angered, and suddenly shot out a green-colored light which landed on the food. Pa! This portion of food immediately turned into nothing. "Yaya!" the bone once again called out in happiness. Its mood improved all of a sudden. It really had quite a temper. Linghan was surprised. The power of this green light was very strong. No, 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 it should not be normally strong, but rather extremely strong. At least, he estimated that he would need to exert his full effort to be a match for it. This bone was like a child emperor that had supreme authority in his grasp. With a slight move, it could turn the whole world over, and there was practically no one that could restrict it. It was only a bone, but how did it possess such power? And how had it gained consciousness? Linghan stood up, and began walking down the mountain. The bone copied his movements. Its intelligence was becoming higher and higher, and it actually absorbed the spiritual chi in the heaven and earth, and grew its own physical body. Torso, limbs, and head quickly grew out. This was a real body of blood and flesh, though there was no soul. However, its body was enshrouded by an air of primal chaos, so how could any normal person be able to distinguish it clearly? What struck Ling Han speechless was that this guy was actually using him as a blueprint, and the body that it formed was a remarkably similar copy of him. As long as it was mere appearance, it would be too easy, but his aura could not be imitated. Yet the bone did not mind at all. It did not want to pass itself off as Ling Han. It was only the mentality of a child, wanting to be like you. What shocked Ling Han was that he did not discover any problem with the bone's body upon first look, and had to stare at it and examine closely to finally discover that there was an additional bone in this body, which was also its true form. It could be claimed that this guy's disguise could be considered perfect. Under such a disguise, the aura that it released was considerably weaker, seeming to be the early stage of Saint King. This was because it had an additional layer of blood and flesh wrapped around it, which naturally weakened some of its aura. After all, this was blood and flesh that it had grown on its own. This was good. It would avoid shocking others. Yeah, the bone spoke up. It now had its own body of flesh and blood, and could finally speak in the true meaning of the word, which made it very overjoyed. Yet the only phrase it could use to express its own will was still, Yaya, and aside from that, it only knew how to imitate words. Ling Han smiled, and took out some clothes from the black tower which he tossed over to it. The two people descended the mountain, and they saw the heavenly phoenix divine maiden and the others not too long after. Upon seeing another that looked completely identical next to Ling Han, they were all shocked. Hadn't you just gone up to explore the mountain? Why had you brought someone back with you, and one that looked completely like you at that? This is Xiao Gu. Ling Han gave the bone a name. This is Xiao Gu? The bone repeated his words, looking dim-witted. Long Xiangyue suddenly spluttered in laughter, and asked, Senior Brother Ling, why does he copy what you say? Senior Brother Ling, why does? The bone exuberantly repeated her words. Was this guy here to be funny? The heavenly phoenix divine maiden and the others all had strange expressions. Who exactly was this person? Chapter 1648 Death Mushroom. Chapter 1648 Death Mushroom. Though the aura exuded from Xiao Gu was very obscure, the heavenly phoenix divine maiden and the other saints naturally could sense it, and knew that this was a saint. But a noble saint would actually be repeating words after someone, and had an expression of naivety and playing cute. Was that really appropriate? Ling Han chuckled and replied, His personality is a little weird. It was indeed quite weird. They had never seen a saint like this. His personality is... Xiao Gu began to repeat words again, looking very dim-witted. Long Xiangyue couldn't help but laugh. This saint was really unusual. What other saint would not be putting on airs, and showing their great might? It was only Ling Han, the heavenly phoenix divine maiden, and other such newly established and young saints that were more amicable. But no matter how good-tempered they were not like Xiao Gu. Did he even treat himself like a saint? Ho ho ho. Xiao Gu also laughed. It was like a sponge now, absorbing everything around it, and learning whatever it could. Come on, let's go to the next mountain. They circled around the mountain, while Ling Han related the scene he had witnessed at the summit, which stunned the heavenly phoenix divine maiden and the others. Xiao Gu was expressionless, though. Every word that Ling Han spoke, it would repeat very patiently. It was not bothered, but Ling Han and the others were annoyed. Having someone repeat all the words that you had already heard by your ear, how could that not be annoying? But by the fourth day, Xiao Gu was finally no longer repeating words, and had instead become selective. It would not repeat words if it had heard something similar before, but for words that it had never heard before, it would repeat them excitedly. Ling Han did not explain the origins of Xiao Gu. He thought that there was no need for it. Though Xiao Gu possessed the strength of a saint, it was as innocent as a child in his eyes. He did not want others to show an unusual reaction towards Xiao Gu upon finding out about its origins. This was very good. The area that Ling Han and his group were presently traveling naturally had been traversed by a great many people before, so they did not find any saintly medicine. Instead, they found a few torn pieces of clothing, which should have been left behind when the cultivators that entered encountered demonic beasts, and were unfortunately eaten. There were not many demonic beasts like the Black Panther, but there was more or less a pattern to it, and that was that there would be one per mountain. Over a month later, the mountains no longer appeared in front of their eyes. Instead, there was a boundless plain, where a large river was flowing. The sound of the water was thunderous, as loud as floodwaters. This really was a massive river, as wide as 1,000 miles, and boasting an unknown length. It flowed here from a very far location, and large mile-high waves would occasionally rise. That scene was really quite astonishing. There were also living creatures in the river. There were large fishes that had sharp horns, large crocodiles with 6 legs and the tail of a bird, and also turtles that floated out of the surface of the water, their size eclipsing the skies, as if they bore a massive mountain on them. These living creatures were all incredibly powerful, but none of them left the water and attacked them. All of them stayed leisurely and carefree in the river. Ling Han and the others also had no intention of going into the water to provoke these powerful demonic beasts. This river was very strange, with patterns of great dows surging in the waters. If they barged in rashly, it was possible that it would cause extremely serious damage to them. They walked along the course of this river. Going by the usual line of thought, anyone would want to know what was there at the end of this great river. Thus, the Empress and the others were possibly at its source. On this journey, 10 days very quickly passed. There were also slight changes to the plain. The variety of vegetation increased, and there were also animals now, both strong and weak. But no matter their strength, none of them had gained intelligence, and they were incredibly vicious. Gradually, they also found herbs here, but their grade wasn't very high, ranging from the spiritual ocean tier and shattering void tier to mountain river tier and heavenly body tier, but from eternal river tier onwards, there were very few, and not a single one in the saint tier at all. Xiao Gu had never seen these animals before, and when he saw one, he would run over and hug it. When he got bored, then he would release it. Sometimes, he would even be hugging a wild bull, or a giant elephant that was more than 10 times his size. The sight was very amusing. After another 3 days, an empty black land suddenly appeared before them. It was about a mile in diameter, and it was exuding a rotten stink from afar, causing one to feel dizzy upon a single sniff. In the very center of this open area, there was a piece of rotten meat. It was completely black, and if one did not look clearly, they could not possibly notice it. And it was precisely this that was the source of the stink. That is... Death mushroom! Ling Han exclaimed in shock after a moment. That piece of rotten meat was actually not genuine rotten meat, but rather a saintly medicine named death mushroom. It was said that only a single saintly medicine like this could be nurtured from within the body of a saint king after his death. However, saints represented the will of the heaven and earth. After their death, their spirits should also return to the heaven and earth, yet if they nurtured such a saintly medicine from their corpses, it would be spurned by the heaven and earth. Thus, death mushroom was incredibly poisonous, and even saint kings had a very high chance of dying if they consumed it directly. That would be equivalent to taking a saint king into one's body. How were they supposed to block it if their bodies exploded from within? However, one only had to refine the poison in the death mushroom, and this would be an incomparable great herb. Even among saintly medicine, it was one of the very best. Godly medicine from level 17 to level 20 could be called saintly medicine, and what Ling Han had previously obtained were basically all level 17 small saintly medicines, and the death mushroom was a saint king great herb. The martial intent of this saint king from when he had been alive was contained in it, and there was great value in studying it even to saint kings. However, this kind of great herb was not easily plucked. It was too poisonous. In the diameter of a mile, not a single blade of grass was growing. Nothing could grow, and even if a saint king approached, it was possible that the poison would invade his body, and he would then be in great trouble. That was because the death mushroom was hated by the heaven and earth, and had a curse on it. This was something that even saint kings had to be wary of. You wouldn't be able to overcome everything else just because you were a peak stage saint king. But where had the dead saint king gone? The death mushroom was directly nurtured from the corpse of a saint king, and grew from absorbing all the essence of a Saint King. Then, the skeleton that the Saint King had left behind should have been visible here. Ling Han and the others exchanged looks, all of them confused. Xiao Gu, meanwhile, did not take it to heart at all. He was only interested in novel things. As for corpses, he obviously had seen one for innumerable years. How can I collect this Saint King medicine? None of them went to ponder further about how this death mushroom had been nurtured. They didn't care even if it had fallen from the sky itself. What was important was how they were supposed to harvest it. The notionless saint shot out a palm strike, his origin power condensing into a large hand that grabbed out at that death mushroom. But in the process of the large hand stretching out, it was continuously corroded by the black chi that rose up in this place. It was already completely corroded before it had managed to grab the death mushroom. And this led to a lashback too. The notionless saint grunted, and raised his right hand. He could see that there was actually a dark area on his palm. There were strange patterns flickering on it, and this black chi was presently spreading upwards from his palm. The notionless saint hurriedly tried to stop it, but it was a feat that was impossible to accomplish. He decisively slashed out at his own right arm by using his other hand as a blade. Pooh! Blood sprayed out, and his right hand was severed at the elbow. This arm fell, but it had already turned into ash before it had even reached the ground. The intensity of the poison was clearly incredible. Chapter 1649 Harvesting Saint King Medicine. Chapter 1649 Harvesting Saint King Medicine. Death mushroom, an extraordinary poison. The notionless saint was a small saint in any case, yet he had just stretched out his origin power into the area where the death mushroom was growing, and had not even touched that saintly medicine, and he had already sustained such a terrifying backlash. If he had really used his hand to make direct contact, what would have happened? His body would have probably directly rotted into a pool of mush. This death mushroom was comparable to a Saint King in itself, the only difference being that it would not make any active movements. A small saint was naturally delusional if he wanted to harvest it. The notionless saint quickly drew out some alchemical pills, ingesting them. The damage that came from severing his own arm was still quite large. Though a new arm immediately reformed and regrew, it had still used some of his life force. This would naturally have damaged his foundations. This is impossible! He shook his head. Merely a slight touch of the aura of the death mushroom, and a small saint could only sever his arm to save himself. If it was direct contact, it would definitely mean absolute death. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden and Long Yushan also shook their heads. This was really a hopeless situation. True, the place where the death mushroom grew was so obvious, so if it could be easily done, would it still be left for them? Before this, there had been many saints who had entered, and there might even have been Saint Kings from the Forbidden Lands among them too. Even Saint Kings could not harvest it, what more they? However, Ling Han brainstormed. If he used lightning flash to harvest the death mushroom, his speed would be indescribably fast, so his period of contact with the poison of the death mushroom would be incredibly short. Then, he could still actively channel the indestructible heaven scroll, endlessly increasing his defense. The problem was that defense and immunity to poison were two different things. Small Tower, can I resist such a powerful poison? He asked Small Tower. Though Saint King medicine was incredibly valuable, how could it compare to his own life? Small Tower sked. Ignorant child, poison is also a part of the regulations of the heaven and earth. The indestructible heaven scroll can resist all the techniques in the world, so what is mere strong poison worth fuck? It had not finished its words when Ling Han had already charged out. Shio, Ling Han had turned into a streak of light, and before the heavenly phoenix divine maiden and the others could react in any way, he had already shot to the central part of the poisonous area. He stretched out his hand and grabbed the death mushroom in one go, directly throwing it into the black tower. Then, his figure continued to streak past, and appeared on the other side of the poisonous area. Under the channeling of the indestructible heaven scroll, his whole body was releasing a golden light, and multiple patterns of great Tao appeared, dazzling the heaven and earth. He slowly circled around the poisonous area and returned, completely unharmed. Why you? Long Yushan pointed at Ling Han, and even her voice was trembling. She really could not have imagined that Ling Han would have plucked the death mushroom so easily. Ling Han broke into a grin. Come on, let's see if there are other such saintly medicines elsewhere. There was something that he did not say. Underneath the death mushroom, he discovered a small piece of flesh, and that was real flesh that belonged to some living being. But it was really very small, smaller than even a fingernail. And it was precisely this piece of flesh that had nurtured the death mushroom. It should be known that even a saint king might not be able to nurture death mushroom. Not only did this saint king have to be incredibly powerful when he was alive, he also had to be killed by the hand of another, and still have his vitality. Otherwise, an aged saint king would not have enough blood essence to nurture the death mushroom. Furthermore, a saint king corpse would only be able to nurture a single death mushroom, and when the death mushroom matured, there would only be a pile of bones left of the saint king corpse. It could no longer nurture a second death mushroom. From this, it could be seen how difficult it was to nurture the death mushroom. Yet now, a piece of flesh the size of a fingernail actually nurtured a death mushroom, and Ling Han had also sensed that there was still astonishing power contained in that piece of flesh. It was definitely capable of nurturing a few more death mushrooms. It was definitely impossible that this was flesh left behind by a saint king's corpse. The blood and flesh of a celestial, Ling Han thought. Perhaps a celestial had been wounded when the Great War had happened all those years ago, and his blood and flesh had spilled. One of the pieces of his flesh had fallen here, and then nurtured the death mushroom. Only the flesh and blood of a celestial could be so powerful. A little bit was enough to nurture a death mushroom, and could even nurture a second and third in future as well. However, the period of growth for a saintly medicine was counted in hundreds of millions of years. Clearly, Ling Han could not possibly stay here and wait for the second death mushroom to sprout. Are you all right? The heavenly phoenix divine maiden asked quickly in worry. I'm fine. Ling Han shook his head with a smile. Xiao Gu watched from the sidelines, his head slanted to one side. Was this very fun? He ignored the others, and directly strode into the poisonous area. Though the death mushroom had already been removed, the poisonous nature of this place did not disappear so quickly. Suddenly, a black aura wound around him, and it was as if they had become multiple chains that continuously entwined around him. Xiao Gu! Long Xiangyue and the heavenly phoenix divine maiden exclaimed. Because he looked completely identical to Ling Han, both women naturally felt affection for him. As Xiao Gu walked, he was completely indifferent, as if this was not a poisonous zone, but rather his own backyard. No matter how much the poison surged, he did not mind at all. Even Ling Han was extremely stunned, what more the heavenly phoenix divine maiden and the others. He was more knowledgeable about the amazing nature of Xiao Gu than the others, but he had never thought that this guy was actually awesome to this extent. And? Ling Han suddenly paused, and looked towards the left sideways from them. Shio, 3 figures shot out. Those were 3 young men, and they were all tall and broad. Their clothes were very strange. Rather than calling them clothes, they should rather be called accessories. They also wore headdresses woven from bird feathers on their heads. The feathers stood 3 feet tall on them. Ling Han looked at these 3 people, his face wearing an expression of surprise. That was because while these people's auras were very strong, they were clearly much weaker than him. Yet he was still unable to distinguish their cultivation levels. Because the clothes that the 3 of them were wearing were too revealing, multiple black vein patterns that looked a little like the demonic patterns of the netherworld were clearly visible on their skin, but upon closer examination, they were completely different. Previously, Ling Han had felt that the cultivators of the netherworld had an evil aura because they were being repelled by the regulations of the heaven and earth. In fact, after he had cultivated the regulations of the netherworld, he realized that there was basically no difference between the two. Extreme Yin gave birth to Yang, and Extreme Yang gave birth to Yin. This was an unending cycle. But the black patterns on these 3 gave him a completely different feeling. Hand over the precious medicine! A young man spoke up, Yet he was saying this to Xiao Gu, who was presently strolling slowly back. Clearly, they had long since known that there was a death mushroom here, and now they did not see the saintly medicine, but there was a person walking there, so who else could have harvested it except for Xiao Gu? His words were incredibly strange. At first, they should not have been able to understand him, but he also communicated the same message through his divine sense, and this managed to breach the language barrier. Hand over the precious medicine! Xiao Gu imitated his words. He was very interested in new phrases, and also very interested in people he had never seen before. When the three young men heard this, they were all furious. You actually dare to parrot my words? You outsiders, do you all not know what suffering is without being taught a lesson? The young man who had spoken earlier moved, and grabbed out at Xiao Gu. Wang, the black patterns on his body flowed, and a black-colored thread actually shot out of his hand, seemingly turning into a web. Immediately, an expression of shock appeared on Ling Han's face. Chapter 1650 Yuan Tribe. Chapter 1650 Yuan Tribe. Ling Han could not distinguish the exact cultivation levels of these three young men, but when the other party moved, he could determine his battle prowess. Not cultivation level, but battle prowess. That was because the cultivation technique this person cultivated was incredibly strange. It was not like the traditional type, and one could not use Heavenly Body Tier or Genesis Tier to call their cultivation levels. It could only be said that his battle prowess was comparable to Eternal River Tier. It was just like, this young man had created a completely different system of cultivation. This was quite amazing. Though creating a cultivation technique was very difficult, a top-grade prodigy would be able to accomplish this feat, but establishing a completely new system of cultivation would mean starting from zero, and making something out of nothing. This was a completely new innovation. Of course, Ling Han definitely did not think that this young man had such a nature-defying ability, but rather it was his ancestors that had created a completely new system of cultivation, and he was only cultivating according to it. In this ancient land that had been closed off from the outside world for who knew how many years, there had actually appeared a group of cultivators that cultivated a different system of cultivation. From the word outsiders, he knew that these three were the natives at this time. Furthermore, their battle prowess was comparable to the high extreme or the consummate level of the Eternal River Tier, which meant that this cultivation system was already very mature, and there were definitely saint-level seniors present. However, though creating a new system of cultivation was very impressive, in the end, everything still revolved around power. How was Eternal River Tier level battle prowess supposed to match a saint? What more when even Ling Han could not clearly feel Xiao Gu's strength? He only knew that the latter was very, very strong, and even he felt a wariness and reluctance to become enemies with Xiao Gu. Pun! The young man's attack landed on Xiao Gu. Being able to hit his target was not because that young man was strong, but rather because Xiao Gu had not dodged or parried at all. The thought processes of Xiao Gu were completely different from normal human beings. His expression was filled with curiosity, and he asked, Yaya? What he meant was, why did you hit me? And using such a completely useless attack at that. Yet the young man was startled. He had not expected that Xiao Gu would be so strong that his attack was rendered completely ineffective. But he did not panic, and still proudly proclaimed, Don't make me bring our tribe elders, or your only path would be death. Hand over the precious medicine. The two young men beside him elbowed him, signaling him to look towards the three extraordinary beauties, the heavenly phoenix divine maiden, Long Yushan, and Long Xiangyue. That young man seemed to be their leader. As his eyes swept over them, his heart involuntarily throbbed wildly. These three women were all exquisitely beautiful, indescribably beautiful. Though he was cultivating a different system, his aesthetic tastes were no different from normal. And these three women, too, have to follow us back to the tribe, he added. Ling Han couldn't help but sneer. Had these three people's heads been kicked by a donkey? Three minor characters with merely Eternal River Tier battle prowess dared to have designs on a saint? A thought flashed in his mind, and he said, Then we'll all go and take a look at your tribe. What gives you the right? The young man in the lead slanted a look at Ling Han, a completely condescending expression on his face. Ling Han stretched out his hand, and as his aura surged, pa pa pa, those three young men immediately knelt, their bodies sweating madly. They felt as if their hearts were about to burst. Lead the way, Ling Han stated calmly. If you blabber any more nonsense, I will begin to commit murder. In any case, I only need one of you to be alive to lead the way. All three of them trembled. They could clearly sense a frightening killing intent from Ling Han's tone, and hurriedly nodded, beginning to lead the way ahead. However, they were sneering internally. You all can be as arrogant as you like now, but when we enter the tribe, all the elites will mobilize, and that will be the time of your deaths. Ling Han saw their expressions clearly, and was completely indifferent. With his present strength, he would be unafraid even if he was faced with a peak-stage Saint King. In the entire ancient realm, there was no longer any elite that could suppress him. As they traveled, Ling Han asked the three of them about the situation here, and under his intimidating pressure, the three young men did not dare to lie. They called themselves the Yuan tribe, and resided in this area. It had been that way for generations, and they had already passed hundreds of billions of years, at least. It had been such a long time that even the godly metal that recorded their history had already worn away, and their history could no longer be traced. There were a considerable number of other tribes like them, and they were all distributed in the proximity of the great river. The nearer they were to the upper course, the stronger the tribe would be, and the Yuan tribe was the weakest. Of course, though they were the weakest, they were not all that weak either. The tribal chief's strength was at the level of peak stage Saint King, and the tribal elders were at the level of ordinary Saint Kings. Every tribe would have at least 5 such elites. It was not clear how many Saint Kings there were in the tribe in the uppermost course of the river, but the Yuan tribe had 5, and their close neighbor, the Qing tribe, similarly had 5 Saint Kings as well. Why did they live along the river? It was not for the sake of survival, but rather for the purpose of cultivation. They had drunk water from that great river since their childhood. That would allow their rate of cultivation to soar, and they had already advanced into the Saint tier in a short 100,000 years. If anyone heard that, they would be terrified to death. You can work hard on cultivation in the outside world, and after a few 100 million years, it was still possible that it was all wasted effort, and you would stay at the consummate level of the eternal river tier, unable to progress further. However, here you merely had to drink some water and cultivate for a while, and becoming a Saint tier would be an easy feat. However, this was only suited to them. There had been outsiders before that had also taken water to drink, and the result was their bodies had directly exploded, which led to their deaths. This was of no relation to cultivation level. That was because the babies born here were only in the heaven tier and shattering void tier, yet they could still easily drink the river water. Apparently, this still had to fit their unique system of cultivation. The further up the river's course, the more essence of great Tao there was in the river water. Thus, there were frequent wars among the tribes. They all hoped to move to a location that was further up the river's course so that their tribe could become stronger and stronger. As they spoke, they had already arrived at the Yuan tribe. This was a massive primitive tribe. It was clearly incredibly huge, but there were no cities built. Instead, there were multiple tents that extended into the distance. Some were houses that had been built with wood. In any case, they were all very simple. There really were a lot of people here, numbering in the millions, and they were all like these 3 young men, dressed in a strange attire and covered in black patterns all over their bodies. Aside from them, they could also see obvious outsiders there. When they walked among them, it was like there was a flag on each of them. They were all too obvious. Apparently, this was the first station for outsiders. And it was at this moment that the 3 young men suddenly called out in gibberish. Suddenly, the surrounding natives all surrounded them, all of them showing a powerful animosity. A middle-aged man walked out of the crowd. His aura was very strong, and judging based on Ling Han's experience, this person should have reached the Saint tier, but he was only comparable to a small saint. In this place, saints were completely common. Simply walk around, and you would meet with saints here and there. This could be treated like a miniature version of the celestial realm. Furthermore, it had long since been severed from the celestial realm, and pushed into the cracks of the ancient realm. Even here, there were saints everywhere. Then, when they went to the celestial realm, there really would be as many saints as there were dogs. The notionless saints and Long Yushan's feeling of superiority as saints was immediately battered to nothing. "Let them go!" the middle-aged man declared coldly. "Let them go!" Seeing so many new people, Xiao Gu was excited, and naturally began to imitate words again. The middle-aged man cast a look on Xiao Gu, and showed a sliver of anger, but he did not take it to heart, and continued. "Now that you have entered our Yuan tribe, you still dare to be arrogant?" Xiao Gu repeated. "Now that you have entered our Yuan. Holy fuck! You're looking for death!" The middle-aged man was furious, and shot out a palm strike at Xiao Gu. Chapter 1651 Another Cultivation System. Chapter 1651 Another Cultivation System. Xiao Gu did not dodge or hide, and allowed this strike to land, causing a muffled sound on his body. His expression was completely curious as he asked, "Yaya? Why are you people all so weird, to offer greetings in this manner?" Only now was the middle-aged man shocked. Though he had not used his full power in that strike, he was still unable to accept that it was so easily resolved just like that. Even his face was about to turn green. He took a few steps backwards, drawing out the distance between himself and Xiao Gu. Then, he began to channel his cultivation technique. Wang wang wang. Multiple black halos actually appeared on him. There were a total of 9, but the first 8 halos were as black as ink, while the 9th was lighter in color. This was the display of a cultivation level of their system of cultivation. 1 black ring represented a single cultivation level, and 9 rings was the strongest level here, which was comparable to the Genesis tier. The darkness of the black ring represented low extreme, medium extreme, early stage, late stage, peak stage, and so on. In any case, it was a complete process of change. Previously, Ling Han had already learned about this from the 3 young men's mouths. This was not any big secret. If they were interrogated about their cultivation technique, they might resist violently, and would rather die than submit. Xiao Gu was indifferent, and even slanted its head to one side. It looked left and looked right. But it was only a while before it then focused in on that middle-aged man, leaking out an obvious expression of loathing. "Yaya!" It showed killing intent. Ling Han was surprised. Though Xiao Gu was baffling, and loved to repeat words, this was only an innocent child in his eyes, yet now it actually showed killing intent. This was stunning to him. Xiao Gu had also once been a man of this world. Fine, at least it was a part of this world. Why would it show such strong animosity towards this middle-aged man like it was facing a strong enemy? "Yaya!" Xiao Gu released a shout of fury, its eyes suddenly shooting out a green-colored light. Pa! The streak of light landed on the middle-aged man, and suddenly blasted him to pieces. So what if he was a small saint? In front of Xiao Gu, he couldn't even survive a single blow. The people around were all stunned before releasing sharp screams as they all turned and fled. "Yaya?" Xiao Gu scratched its head, its expression completely vacant. Why had it been angry just now? "You've gotten into trouble." There were still some outsiders there, and all of them showed dissatisfaction towards Ling Han and his group. "The spiritual qi and natural resources here are abundant. We have only come to an agreement with them after much difficulty, allowing us to cultivate here and trade resources, yet you guys actually killed someone here. Isn't this causing trouble to us?" They all pointed fingers. Perhaps they actually were no longer afraid of them, because they knew that the Yuan tribe would definitely move to punish Ling Han and his group angrily. Otherwise, who would dare be so insolent in front of saints? Ling Han frowned and said, "You all have your way of handling things, and we have ours. What right do you have to reproach us? On the basis that we are all cultivators of the immortal realm, I will not call you to account. If you blurt any more nonsense, I will let you suffer the consequences of your own actions." These people dared not speak further. No matter what, there were saints among these people. How could they possibly trifle with saints? But there were still a few people grumbling internally. What were they so puffed up about? They would become corpses in a short while. It was too unfortunate for those 3 women. All of them were astonishingly beautiful, but what a pity, they would be either killed or defiled by barbarians. Ling Han saw this, and couldn't help but feel his killing intent burn. He flicked out a finger, and pa, a few people who had unbearable expressions on their faces immediately died from having their heads pierced through. Fuck, did they really think that he was a benevolent person, and would not commit a massacre? Now, everyone was shivering from fear. Only now did they recall the authority of saints. They were the strongest existence of the immortal realm, and represented the will of heaven and earth. How could they allow insults? Shio. And it was at this moment that a few figures shot from the depths of the tribe. All of their auras were incredibly strong, as if they were capable of even shattering the heavens. They definitely were Saint King level, but because their system of cultivation was different, Ling Han was unable to accurately determine just what level these people had actually reached. Kill all of them! An old man with a crown of feathers on his head commanded. The feathers were as tall as 9 meters and incredibly dazzling in color. Clearly, one only had to look at their headdresses to estimate every person's status here. The longer the feathers one was adorned with, the higher his status. Yes, 4th Elder! The 4 people by the old man's side all answered respectfully. They all leaped out, and surrounded Ling Han and his group. Long Yushan hurriedly drew Long Xiangyue into her spatial god tool. Once the battle broke out, that would be a battle of saints. Merely the slightest scrape, and Long Xiangyue would easily lose her life. Wang. Those 4 people all activated their cultivation techniques to the fullest. Black rings abruptly appeared on their bodies. They all had 9 rings each, and the darkness of the 9th ring was higher than that of the middle-aged man from before. Through comparison, these 4 should be great saints. Xiao Gu again became filled with killing intent, his face showing an expression of fury. He loudly roared, "Ya!" His eyes glowed. Pa. A green ray of light streaked past. He only turned his head, and the green light swept over those 4 great saint-level elites. However, this time, the 4 great elites did not die. They were only split in 2 by that green light, and could still rejoin their bodies with much difficulty. The 4th Elder showed an expression of shock. Even he was terrified at the sight of this kind of strength, but only after a moment of being startled, he suddenly exclaimed in shock, "Green light! Green light! You are the legendary destroyer!" He pointed at Xiao Gu, his expression wild. Green light, you! Xiao Gu again began to imitate his words. Even if he was a native of this place, as long as he did not channel that kind of cultivation technique, and showed the black rings of light, it would be very normal. The 4th Elder cried out repeatedly, and another 4 elites **** appeared after only a while. 3 of the elites had the same attire as he had, while the last one had a headdress whose feathers were actually 12 meters long. He was the tribal chief of the Yuan tribe. "4th, you actually did not manage to take care of these outsider mutts?" The 3rd Elder laughed loudly, his voice like a bell. He had always been at odds with the 4th Elder, so now that he had the chance, he naturally had to mock him. Yet the 4th Elder's expression was grim and serious. As he pointed at Xiao Gu, he exclaimed, "He can release green light, the legendary green light of destruction." What? The 4 great elites all paled. It has been passed on through the generations that there would be a day when a man that used green light would appear and destroy everything. Yet Xiao Gu was still earnestly imitating his words. "4th, you actually..." Then he answered his own question. "He can release..." And it seemed he was more and more fluent with his words. In a few more days he would not speak in clumps like this. "Charge!" The 5 of them had solemn expressions as they stretched their hands out towards the skies. Wang. The power of innumerable others of the tribe surged into their bodies in a very strange manner. That was the power of the nation, or at least something of the sort. 9 black rings also appeared on their bodies, and they were practically all as black as ink. Charge! Xiao Gu imitated, and it was very fitting for the situation. Seeing the black rings on these people, it also showed a boundless killing intent. Chapter 1652. Chapter 1652, Destroyer. Ling Han was not sure whether Xiao Gu would bring a calamity of destruction to this place, but he could confirm one fact, and that was that Xiao Gu was definitely as incompatible as fire and water with the people here. To be more exact, it should be filled with animosity towards this kind of cultivation system. Xiao Gu took the initiative to charge out, green light shooting from its eyes and wound around its hands. The light was filled with thriving vitality, yet its destructive power was boundless. Even a Saint King would be in big trouble if he was touched even a bit by that green light. However, the 5 elites all drew upon the power of the tribe. This could be considered as a different kind of power of the nation. With the help of such a power boost, the black rings on them had enlarged greatly. Charge! They rushed forwards, beginning a fierce battle with Xiao Gu. As for Ling Han and the others, they did not take them to heart at all. It was very obvious that all of them were very much weaker than them. Once they killed Xiao Gu, they could just calmly deal with the lot of them. Xiao Gu was really very strong. Its battle prowess was considerably stronger than even ordinary peak stage Saint Kings, and could be considered a big shot among Saint Kings, but it was facing 5 Saint Kings, and they were Saint Kings that had drawn on power of the nation. These 5 people were too powerful, especially the chief of the Yuan tribe. He initially was already a peak stage Saint King with frightening battle prowess, but added with the boost from power of the nation, it seemed like he had broken through the limits of Saint King tier and had become terrifyingly strong. Xiao Gu was unafraid, and battled fiercely with the 5 of them. Its disadvantage was that it was only a bone. Even its body was formed from forcibly condensing the elite of heaven and earth into solid form, and not a real body. This naturally affected its battle prowess. However, it was indeed very strong. It fiercely blasted out green light with astonishing destructive power that even the 5 great elites were incredibly wary of. But under the siege formed by the combined forces of the 5 great elites, it was still at a disadvantage, and this was something that nothing could be done about. That was because its opponents were too strong. Any single one of them had the battle prowess of a peak stage Saint King, and the strongest among them had already exceeded this level. Step back, Ling Han said to the heavenly phoenix divine maiden and the others. Then, with a battle cry, he also charged into the battle. He was going to lend Xiao Gu a helping hand. You are overestimating yourself, the 4th elder sneered, and pressed out a palm towards Ling Han. Lightning flash. Ling Han suddenly sped up. Xiao, at this moment, his speed had reached the limits of the ancient realm, and in a way that the 4th elder completely did not expect and was not alert for, he charged right in front of the former, and shot out a punch right at the other's head, the 9 heavens flame blazing on his fist. With this kind of extreme speed, anyone would be hit if he was not on the alert. But a Saint King was still a Saint King, after all, what more when he possessed peak battle prowess? The 4th elder suddenly spat out a mouthful of vitality in this kind of situation, and forced his body to swiftly lean backwards, trying to avoid this punch from Ling Han. At the same time, he shot out a flying kick aimed straight at Ling Han's chest to prevent the threat that came from Ling Han's continuous approach. It could be said that in his present condition, such a reaction was the most logical. Ling Han humphed, and his fist descended, landing on the 4th elder's kneecap. Pung! The punch landed, and a terrible scream was heard. The 4th elder had already been sent flying. One of his legs had been blown apart, and with how frightening the destructive power of the 9 heavens flame was, the flames were still spreading upwards from his knee, intending to burn his whole person to nothing. The 4th elder was very decisive, and severed his body with a hand from the hip downwards, so he was sliced in half. In this way, though he had still sustained serious injury, he had removed a fatal threat to his life. 4th! The other 4 elites all exclaimed in shock. I'm fine! The 4th elder exclaimed, his face pale. In truth, the damage he had suffered was extremely serious. He had forcibly severed the lower half of his body, and lost a great amount of blood essence. Even if he was a Saint King, he would need a great many years to fully recover. He burned his blood essence, forcibly growing out 2 new legs. Otherwise, in a battle of this level, he would be very much helpless. Be careful of his speed and those flames, he advised. The other 4 elites nodded. That extreme speed was indeed frightening, and even they could not trace it. They had to be absolutely vigilant and guard against it, while the destructive power of those flames was too terrifying, forcing the 4th elder to cut his losses. Don't treat him like an ordinary 9 rings elite, the 5 great elites reminded one another. Meanwhile, Xiao Gu was incredibly cold and detached. At present, its killing intent had seeped out, and it was proficient in battle like an incredibly experienced assassin. It only had one aim, and that was to kill these 5 powerful enemies. The battle continued. Because they were already on guard, Ling Han's extreme speed could no longer let him succeed like how he had before due to their carelessness and lack of anticipation, but it still created a great problem for the 5 great elites. They had to stay alert at all times, or Ling Han would possibly charge over abruptly, and give them a fatal blow. Ling Han used his full battle prowess, the killing formations active. This was his capital that allowed him to face these 5 great elites head-on, but if one was talking about destructive power, the 9 heavens flame was more advantageous. He used the immovable deity metal body mystical power, and 6 arms formed, which allowed him to simultaneously use a variety of different celestial techniques. The divine demon sword and the broken wooden sword slashed out simultaneously, the sword light surging out like an incredibly frightening dragon. So, he is actually so strong. In the distance, Long Yushan was already gaping in shock. She knew that Ling Han was very freakish, but she had never imagined that a young man that had previously been completely inferior to her in cultivation level would catch up and completely surpass her, becoming a medium saint, and his battle prowess was so strong that she could only look up at him. Her thoughts were in a mess, yet she suddenly recalled that ridiculous suggestion from Long Xiangyue, and her pretty face involuntarily flushed with a rosy red. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden, meanwhile, had an expression filled with pride. This was her man. Seeing Long Yushan's face fill with embarrassment and shyness, she knew that the former already had Ling Han's figure in her heart, which put her on guard. For those who had already entered the rear court of the Ling clan, she would not be bothered, but she definitely would not allow anyone new to join. Ling Han and Xiao Gu joined forces, battling the 5 great elites fiercely. To Ling Han, this battle was a little baffling. In truth, it could have been completely avoided, but since they were already exchanging blows, he did not hesitate any longer. He used his full power, wanting to suppress these 5 great elites. They were definitely as incompatible with Xiao Gu as fire and water, and only one side would be able to survive at the end. Then, Ling Han's choice was very simple to make. Kill. Xiao Gu's battle experience was all instinctive, but as the battle progressed, it became more and more proficient. It was not simply using those techniques based on instinct, but was more actively channeling these techniques. At most, this could only increase its strength by another 10% to 20%, but in such a vigorous battle, could they afford the gap of 10 to 20% of battle prowess? Ling Han's side suddenly got the upper hand. Not good, the legends were true. The sun of green light would bring destruction. Let us quickly head to the Qing tribe, and ask them for help. The chief of the Yuan tribe communicated to the 4 elders through divine sense. But they are feuding with us, and we have fought for who knows how many years. Who knows how many people of both tribes have been killed in all these years? The second elder said doubtfully. On the question of the survival of the whole world, what is such a minor feud worth? The Yuan tribe chief declared resolutely. Not just the Qing tribe, but the Yun tribe, Jin tribe, and Lu tribe, all the tribes have to unite and destroy this disaster together. Chapter 1653. Chapter 1653, Deduction. The 5 elites had reached an agreement, and were about to retreat. If they continued fighting, it was possible that all of them would die. Can you escape? Ling Han had long since anticipated this. He spread out the 9 heavens flame, which formed a massive cage. Not good! When the 5 great elites saw this, they were both furious and shocked. After such a long battle, they naturally knew the frightening nature of the 9 heavens flame, so how could they dare to allow such flames to wind around them? That was a calamity that would lead to their deaths. However, throwing out this technique was also very dangerous for Ling Han because he had released the 9 heavens flame, which meant that he had temporarily lost a powerful weapon that could threaten the 5 great elites, causing him to become a target of their attacks. Kill this brat! True enough, the eyes of the 5 great elites became cold, focusing on Ling Han. At present, they were genuinely feeling that their lives were threatened. Naturally, they would spare no expense to kill Ling Han. Previously, though they had not been merciful, their main target was Xiao Gu, and they mostly guarded and defended against Ling Han. Ling Han suddenly felt tremendous pressure. That was the combined battle prowess of 5 peak stage Saint King tier level elites, with one of them even leaping out of this level. Every blow that blasted at him was like an earth-shattering tsunami that could destroy a great star. It couldn't be helped. He wanted to kill them all in one go, so they naturally would counterattack at all costs. Xiao Gu released a furious shout. Its mentality was very innocent. Ling Han was the first person it had met, and he treated it very kindly as well, so it had subconsciously become reliant on Ling Han. These 5 people were its fated enemies in the first place, and now they actually wanted to kill Ling Han, so its rage naturally soared sky high. In its violent rage, its whole body was glowing. Xiao it too drew out a weapon. It was actually a bone. That was its true form, which it was holding in its hand and wielding like a staff. Though it was not very long, every wave would produce a rainbow of green light with incredibly frightening destructive power. This definitely could not be the bone of a Saint King, it had to belong to a severing mundane tier at least. In an ordinary situation, even a precious tool of severing mundane tier would be useless. If your cultivation level was inadequate, then even if you wielded a Celestial King tool, you would not be able to release its might. However, Xiao Gu was different. This tool was its true form, and the wielder was the puppet instead. In this way, the celestial bone showed its might, and how many people in the immortal realm could resist it? What kept the 5 great elites hopeful was the fact that though the green light was indestructible, the wielder was not strong at all, so they could calmly dodge. However, Ling Han had already begun to close in. The cage formed by the 9 heavens flame was rapidly closing in, approaching those 5 great elites. Damn it! The 5 great elites all roared. If the web of fire tightened around them, they would be refined alive. Furthermore, as the space became smaller and smaller, it would become increasingly difficult for them to dodge Xiao Gu's attacks. Blood Ocean Great Technique! The Yuan tribe chief shouted loudly, his body shattering with a bang, and actually forming a shower of blood. However, he had obviously not died. Every drop of blood passed out through the slits left in the web of fire, and then recondensed outside, forming his true form. The 4 elders did the same, their bodies turning into a shower of blood, and managing to escape. However, though they had escaped, all of their faces were pale, and the black rings they had also dimmed considerably. They seemed to have paid a great price for managing this feat. How's it possible? The elders were actually forced to use the Blood Ocean Great Technique. This is an absolute life-saving technique, and definitely would not be used unless there was no other option. How could these outsiders be so strong, forcing the elders into such desperate straits? Beneath them, all the members of the Yuan tribe were gasping in shock. They had seen too many outsiders throughout these years. Which of them had not behaved humbly and obediently? Yet now, they were actually reduced to such a sorry state by 2 outsiders. Let's go! The Yuan tribe chief shouted loudly. They were no match for Ling Han and Xiao Gu, they had to find others to help them. Ling Han used lightning flash. Whoever was fleeing, he would stop their progress. He discovered that the speed cultivated by these natives was indeed very fast, and their battle prowess was also truly strong, but in terms of technique, they were too lacking. It was just like they had only learned a single cultivation technique, and increased their cultivation level, but their use of techniques was incredibly pitiful. Ling Han was a good example. Just how many celestial techniques did he know? Darkness of the Paramount Night, Flying Dragon Shadow Hands, Tide of the Ages. Every one of them had powerful might, but the elites of the Yuan tribe did not even have one. The only Blood Ocean Great technique was used to save their lives. If they had managed to learn celestial techniques, their battle prowess would improve further. However, they were cultivating a completely different system of cultivation, so it was a mystery whether they would even be able to use celestial techniques because the use of celestial techniques was based on one's cultivation technique. Similarly, if one clearly practiced spear techniques since childhood, yet was given a saber, then how would he be able to release the might of his spear techniques? Thankfully, they did not know how to. Otherwise, the result could have possibly been completely opposite, and it would have been Ling Han and the others thinking of ways to escape. Ling Han's heart suddenly jolted. Where there was only power, with no technique, the battle prowess of these 5 people was already so strong. What did that mean? The frightening nature of this different system of cultivation. One did not need any specific techniques, and only had to master the basics, and he would be able to possess frightening battle prowess. Was this a branch from some force of the celestial realm? That was not right. He had never heard that there was another system of cultivation in the celestial realm. This was definitely a large matter, or could even be considered a matter that could overturn everyone's perceptions. One of the 2 kinds of cultivation systems was definitely stronger than the other. The inferior one would be eliminated, to be replaced by the superior one. If this cultivation system was really so awesome, shouldn't the whole celestial realm have switched to it? Then those above Saint Tier definitely would not be called Severing Mundane. They would possibly be called Tenling Elites or something of the sort. Furthermore, though he was still not clear about the time of the great turmoil of the celestial realm, it was definitely not as long as 100 billion years ago. This also meant that one corner of the celestial realm had been struck down a very, very long time ago, and buried in the cracks of space of the ancient realm. This had not happened because of that great turmoil. Hold on, was it because they wanted to eliminate this cultivation system that this piece of heaven and earth was buried in the ancient realm? But being able to create such a system, its inventor definitely had to be an incredibly powerful existence. Could he have been trapped so easily? Ling Han could not understand. Perhaps there was an answer that lay in the depths of this mystery realm, or perhaps it would have to wait until he entered the celestial realm, and search ancient tomes to find some clues, and piece together the truth. As he thought this, he did not hesitate in his movements either. After standing in the path of the 5 great elites, he again used the 9 heavens flame, which trapped the 5 elites once more. Even if they used the Blood Ocean Great technique to escape, it would be useless. It would only delay their deaths for a while longer. The 5 great elites roared, but did not beg for mercy. Just like Xiao Gu despised them naturally, they also saw Xiao Gu as an old enemy that was absolutely irreconcilable with them. Then, there was only one word to sum everything up: fight. However, with the combined efforts of Ling Han and Xiao Gu, the 5 great elites could not evade the fate of death. There was no grief from the heaven and earth, nor was there a rain of blood streaming down. It was as if just a few nobodies had died. Was this because they were in the mystery realm? Or was it that this cultivation system had not gotten the approval of the heaven and earth, so the heaven and earth would not be moved by the deaths of a few Saint Tier level elites like them? Ling Han's heart was filled with curiosity. Chapter 1654 Peak Stage Medium Saint. Chapter 1654 Peak Stage Medium Saint. Ling Han was a man with a great curiosity. Besides, the more he thought closely about this matter, the more frightening it became. Perhaps there was an earth-shattering secret concealed behind it. After Xiao Gu showed its might, it returned to being silly. Its completely confused expression was absolutely incapable of convincing others that it was one of the strongest existences in the world today. Ling Han did not start a massacre. He could not simply issue a death penalty to those who had merely cultivated a different cultivation technique, but he ransacked the whole wealth of the Yuan tribe without hesitation. Those people from before had not lied. This tribe was indeed abundant with resources. Though there weren't any saintly medicines, there was really a large amount of eternal river tier level godly medicines, and there was also a great volume of godly metal. Ling Han even found 3 pieces that were saint tier level. The whole tribe was anxious, fearing that Ling Han and his group would eliminate their entire tribe. After Ling Han had spoken repeatedly, the members of the Yuan tribe finally felt relieved. He obtained the cultivation technique that this tribe was cultivating, and upon closer look, as expected, it was a completely different cultivation system. Though the spiritual qi here was incredibly abundant, to the natives, this actually was completely useless because the source of their power did not come from converting spiritual qi into their own origin power, but rather was that great river. There was a kind of amazing substance in the river water that could provide them with power, and in terms of regulations, it was also the same. It belonged solely to the great river, and was completely different from this heaven and earth. From a certain perspective, these people could be considered to belong to another world. Apparently, he really had to make his way to the source of the river for a look. There was also alchemy here. After some examination, Ling Han found out that if these alchemical pills were concocted, they were not the slightest bit beneficial for the residents of the ancient realm, and would even cause them serious injury because they were completely unable to strengthen their origin power, but rather would be converted into another kind of energy, which was called spiritual power. Ling Han wanted to ask Xiaogu about this, but it would either imitate his words, or keep exclaiming, Yaya. It was completely impossible to get any form of clue from it. He refined the death mushroom inside the black tower, removing the corrosive power contained within, and leaving behind only substances that were beneficial. At first, he wanted to share with the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden, but the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden insisted that he consume it alone. As long as you advance into the Great Saint Tier, you will be able to bring us with you into the celestial realm. There are great numbers of saintly medicine in the celestial realm, so I am in no rush at all, she said. Ling Han nodded. These words were logical. Whether it was him, the Empress, or the Rain Emperor, as long as one of them had reached the Great Saint Tier, they would be able to open the doors to the celestial tool, and bring a large number of people through their spatial god tool with them into the celestial realm. Of course, it was best that he become a great saint first because with his freakish nature, he would be able to enter into the heavenly tribulation again to collect the heavenly tribulation fluid after reaching the Great Saint Tier. Even if there was no one aside from himself that could consume this substance within the Genesis Tier, they could still drink it after advancing into celestial level, right? Though the lightning element regulations of the immortal realm indeed could not be compared with the celestial realms, they had the same roots, though the former had a lower level, and belonged to the basics. However, if he managed to grasp the basics, then when he referred to the lightning element regulations of the celestial realm in future, he naturally would be able to slowly improve upon them. He consumed the death mushroom. This thing looked disgusting, and tasted very disgusting as well. Even if the harmful substances inside had been removed, there was still a rank stench to it. It did not have any of the refreshing aroma that other saintly medicine should have at all. Ling Han didn't even chew, and directly swallowed down this saintly medicine. He channeled his cultivation technique, and began to refine the medicinal effects. In only a short while, a powerful energy surged fiercely inside his body. Ling Han quickly guided the medicinal effects so that more stars would be born in the silvery river inside his dantian. On the other side, innumerable regulations also appeared in Ling Han's mind, looking like a deluge of heavenly flowers that could not be grasped at all. That was because this death mushroom had not been nurtured from the body of a saint king, but rather from a more powerful being. That person's comprehension in terms of regulations was too high, belonging to a level that Ling Han could not understand at all. Never mind. Ling Han only needed accumulation of origin power. With the reincarnation tree in his possession, the comprehension of regulations was instead a small matter. He refined the medicinal effects, and the stars in his body were forming at a frightening rate. 60 million, 70 million, 80 million. The effect that saintly medicine had on the increase of accumulation of origin power was actually not very good, but this was a Saint King medicine. Furthermore, Ling Han himself was only a medium saint, and he could withstand the violent medicinal effects with the strength of his physique, and this led to a rate of advancement that others could only envy. Finally, the number of stars stopped at 99,999,999, and he was only a single star away from reaching the extreme of the medium saint tier, but this last star was relatively harder to form. Ling Han went into seclusion for 15 days, and only then did he manage to succeed in this feat. He presently had the qualification to break through to the great saint tier. Ling Han couldn't help but feel rueful. If this mystery realm had not been there, then everyone would be able to more or less make their preparations for entering into the celestial realm, yet now he still had to find the Empress and the others. However, on the other hand, if this mystery realm had not existed, he could not possibly have reached the pinnacle of the medium saint tier so quickly either. He exited the Black Tower. Attempting to break through to the great saint tier required sufficient comprehension. Even with the help of the reincarnation tree, the time he needed would number in years at least, so how could he make the attempt with a worried heart? Now that he had reached the pinnacle of the medium saint tier, his personal battle prowess was close to a peak stage Saint King's. Even if he did not rely on his killing formations, he would be overwhelmingly strong. Now, though the killing formations were still very strong, they could only be considered in addition to what was already perfected. For a cultivator, the most important is still his own strength, Ling Han said internally. Killing formations could be used as a supplementary strength, but he definitely could not become reliant on them, just like how he could not hide in the Black Tower the moment he encountered any danger. He exited the Black Tower, and the 5 of them left the Yuan tribe and continued their journey. They followed the river's course, their destination being the source. The Yuan tribe that was furthest downriver already had 5 Saint King level elites that could reach peak stage Saint King's level with a further boost of power, or even be stronger than that. Then, just how strong would those tribes in the middle course and upper course be? Ling Han had asked closely, but the Yuan tribe could not possibly enter the middle course zone. Thus, the only thing they knew was the strength of the over dozen tribes nearest to them downriver. The strongest already had 10 Saint Kings. Perhaps the tribes living upriver might even have 100 Saint Kings. At least presently, Ling Han did not want to touch such a massive problem. No matter what, he had to find the Empress and the others before anything else. Thus, he also warned Xiao Gu many times not to easily move at all times and expose itself. It was still willing to listen to Ling Han's words. It called out, "Yaya," while repeatedly nodding, expressing that it would hold back from making a move. They did not create trouble on their journey, and merely journeyed according to the river's course. Occasionally, they would still encounter the locals. They would avoid them if possible, but if evasion was impossible, they would quickly end the battle. As long as they were not Saint King level opponents, they could still easily deal with them with Ling Han's present battle prowess. However, the further they traveled, the more difficult the journey became. This great river was incredibly important to the natives. The lower course was still fine, but from the middle course onwards, there were elites overseeing the river banks. If one wanted to travel according to the river's course, they would have to get through these elites. Not only were there elites, there were also killing formations that were completely different from the formations of the ancient realm and possessed astonishing might. Should he take a different path, or barge through directly? Ling Han began to consider the matter. Chapter 1655 Upper Course Tribes. Chapter 1655 Upper Course Tribes. Ling Han decided to first take a different path. Otherwise, negotiations would still take time, so it would be better to take a detour, saving time and effort. But he soon realized that this was not a realistic strategy. When they came to the middle course, there was only a long, narrow plain on this side of the river, with tall mountains by the side. At present, the plain had been occupied by the various tribes, so if he wanted to take a different path, he would have to pass through the mountains. However, the mountain path would be too difficult to travel. Not only would he have to circle around a very far distance, It was not peaceful in the mountains, either, as there were peak stage Saint King level demonic beasts. True, all the tribes lived by the river course so that other tribes would not have the chance to obtain the river water from further up the river course, so how could they possibly allow others to easily travel via a different path? Then they would just have to stick to the same path. Ling Han told Xiao Gu not to imitate the speech of others no matter what. Wasn't imitating their speech in front of saint-level elites an insult to them? Furthermore, this guy was getting more and more fluent in its words recently. It did not even pause in its words now, and was very fast even when it was repeating the words of others. The first middle course tribe they encountered was called the Yu tribe. A great formation rippled. With the great river as its foundations, its power also originating from the river flow, and sharing the same origins as the cultivation system here, it belonged to a completely new formation system. What Ling Han had previously learned was completely useless here. If he wanted to unravel the formation, he could only barge through with brute force. "All of you, follow behind me," Ling Han said. The strength of this formation should be comparable to an early stage Saint King's, and was definitely not something that the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden and the others could stand against. In Xiao Gu's case, it would not be convenient for it to make a move. Otherwise, there would be no need for them to negotiate. Not only would they have to battle all the way through, they would also alert all the tribes which would begin hunting them down. Long Xiangyue had long since entered into the spatial god tool. The four of them followed behind Ling Han, with Xiao Gu bringing up the rear. It was powerful enough, so if any unexpected situation happened, it could take care of their group from the rear while Ling Han would be in charge in the front. Ling Han waved a palm, splitting the formation open, and calmly entered. Whether it was a formation or attack, they all had one basic rule, and that was that strength was the most important factor. At present, Ling Han's power was close to a peak stage Saint King's. Thus, he did not have to be concerned which system the formation belonged to, nor did he have to look for any kind of weakness, and only had to break it open with brute force. Suppressed under his frightening power, the power of the formation could not corrode them. It was like the formation itself was a sea, and they had gained the ability to avoid the water, forcibly setting up a safe passageway through the water. The Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden and the others all clicked their tongues in amazement. The violent power of the formation was roaring 2 or 3 feet away from them, yet could not approach them in the slightest. "Humph, who dares barge into our Yu tribe?" A cold voice rang out, sounding out in everyone's minds through divine sense. Ling Han smiled slightly. "Friend, we only want to pass by, please accommodate us." "Outsiders?" This voice paused slightly, seeming to be considering. After a while, it finally exclaimed, "You all have to travel by the river course, and cannot veer off the path. If you enter into our tribe, then don't blame us for being rude." This meant that he was going to let them pass. Ling Han nodded. This was not because that man was easy to deal with, but rather the strength that he showed was powerful enough, so the former agreed to have them pass through to prevent any accidents from happening for no reason. If it had been the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden and the others asking for passage outside the formation, this man would have ignored them. Only with enough strength did one's words have adequate weight. Otherwise, it would only be shouting that would serve no purpose. Ling Han naturally did not point that out. This kind of matter needed a tacit mutual understanding. He strode over, and suddenly discovered that the might of the formation had weakened considerably. Clearly, that person from the Yu tribe had deliberately controlled the formation, showing them benevolence. "Many thanks, friend," Ling Han said with a smile. The person did not speak, and remained silent. In only about 15 minutes' time, they had already exited the formation. A boundless plain appeared in front of them. This area actually still belonged to the territory of the Yu tribe, but the formation would ordinarily be used to guard against the tribes from the lower course, so there was no protective formation set up here. When they headed further up, and exited the territory of the Yu tribe, they would see the formation that had been laid out by the next tribe, which was used to guard against the Yu tribe. Ling Han stopped, and smilingly said to Xiao Gu, "Xiao Gu has performed well this time. Humph, who dares barge into our tribe? Friend, I only want to. Ling Han had just spoken up when Xiao Gu immediately imitated his speech impatiently, repeating the words of Ling Han and that member from the tribe again, involuntarily causing the four of them to erupt in laughter. Apparently, Xiao Gu had controlled itself with much difficulty previously, and thus was impatiently imitating speech again. After Xiao Gu had finished repeating their words, it looked blankly at the four of them. Why are you laughing? It slanted its head to one side. Yeah. It then began laughing dumbly as well. After a day of travel, another formation appeared in front of them. The five of them still barged through forcefully. That was the territory of the Tong tribe. Thankfully, the elite that was in charge of the formation had no desire to start a battle, and after Ling Han said a few polite words, he allowed them to pass through, but he was not as benevolent as that person from the Yu tribe. He did not weaken the might of the formation, and only acted as if he did not see the five of them. Their luck was not too bad. They only had to politely say a few words, and they would be allowed to pass. However, when they entered the upper course area, they encountered trouble at the first passing. Scram! When they entered into the formation, they immediately heard a sharp rebuke ring out. Ling Han frowned. From the very beginning, this was their attitude. It looked like it would be slightly difficult for them to ask for passage. The upper course tribes were too overbearing. Friend, we are only asking to pass through, he stated calmly. I told you all to scram, did you not hear me? The person's tone was very provoking. Ho, I do not know how to scram, so forgive me for not obeying. Ling Han strode over, his anger also spiking. Insolence! The person sneered. Boom! A burst of great power suddenly came from the formation. A pitch-black wild beast suddenly appeared, and pounced to attack Ling Han and the others. This wild beast looked like a giant lion, but it had a pair of horns on its head and as many as 9 tails. It clearly had been produced from that person actively channeling the formation, starting an offensive towards Ling Han and the others. Ling Han flicked out a finger. One sword chi surged out, dazzling the skies, and splitting this fierce beast in two. However, it had been formed from the Great Formation, so even if it was cut in half, it would not die. Instead, it would absorb the power of the formation, and when it was split, it would become 2 fierce beasts. Haha, this is the 10,000 manifestations Great Formation. The more you all resist, the greater the power will be provoked from the formation. You are all merely seeking death. The person laughed. Despicable outsiders, all of you will die. From his tone, it seemed that he was filled with fury towards outsiders. Perhaps he had suffered at the hands of outsiders previously, and was thus venting his hatred on Ling Han and his group. Ling Han spread out his divine sense. Though the power of the formation was very strong, and would cause damage to one's spirit, his present divine sense was incredibly resilient, so he was not afraid at all. He forcibly spread out his divine sense within the formation. This was not an illusion formation, so Ling Han soon located the person who was controlling it, a large man wearing a feathered crown on his head and whose upper body was bare. Because he was presently channeling the formation with his full effort, the black rings on him had also appeared. 9 rings, and the 9th ring was clearly not dark enough. His cultivation level probably should be equivalent to middle stage Great Saint tier. Humph, you actually dare release your divine sense towards here. Are you dissatisfied that you are not dying fast enough? The large man also discovered Ling Han was spying on him. He immediately clenched his fist, and shot out a punch at Ling Han's divine sense. Shio! Ling Han immediately withdrew his divine sense, and menacingly declared, I am coming to find you now! Chapter 1656 Breaking the Formation. Chapter 1656 Breaking the Formation. Ling Han turned around, and headed in the direction of the large man. His speed was astonishingly swift, and even the heavenly phoenix divine maiden and the others had slight difficulty following him. They saw him throwing out punches repeatedly, destroying each of the fierce beasts that attacked them with a single punch. The consequence that this led to was indeed the ever-increasing number of the fierce beasts, as they consistently pounced on them. Every fierce beast that the formation gave rise to had the battle prowess of an early-stage Saint King. It was still fine if there were only a few, but after the number had reached a few hundred, the battle prowess definitely could be compared to that of a peak-stage Saint King, and even Ling Han would have to expend slightly more effort. More importantly, the number of the fierce beasts was continuously increasing. The large man that was controlling the formation smirked coldly. "How can you possibly reach me if you barge around forcefully like that? It would not even be a third of the way here, and you would be surrounded by the fierce beasts, like a tiger that would be torn apart by a pack of wolves." However, Ling Han's strength had far surpassed the large man's expectations. Only when he had traveled 4/5 of the way was Ling Han surrounded by an ocean of fierce beasts, and was not able to take another step further. "Ha ha ha, I really have never seen someone as stupid as you." The large man scoffed in derisive laughter. This formation was unique. There was no future in breaking the formation by force, and the best strategy would be to actively weaken one's cultivation level, and merely stay on the defense, making no move to attack to prevent more formation beasts from appearing. Only then would one have the chance to walk out of the great formation. But in that way, the man guarding the formation would only have to unleash a fierce offensive, and he would be able to fluster the person who had entered the formation completely. So, there was a choice: would you release your full strength, or not? Ling Han paid him no regard. He merely shot out punches continuously, destroying each and every fierce beast, and causing the formation to give rise to even more. The Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden and the others were all confused by his actions. "Aren't you simply asking for trouble like this?" Ling Han only rained down blows. By now, the number of fierce beasts was more than 100,000. Though it was impossible that they would all attack at the same time, when several hundred or several thousand attacked simultaneously, this was still enough to make a peak-stage Saint King sweat. But when Ling Han destroyed another fierce beast, the fierce beast that had been turned into over 100 pieces still wanted to form their respective bodies again, yet it only turned into multiple masses of black chi that was continuously struggling. They did not immediately form over 100 new fierce beasts like how they had before. Not only that, even the over 100,000 fierce beasts that had already formed did not attack again. Instead, it was like they had become drunk, and were stumbling and shaky in their steps. What was going on here? The Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden and the others all looked at Ling Han with surprise. Ling Han stopped and said, "Whether it is a formation or a human being, there is always an upper limit. No matter how strong your potential is, when you are forced to the end of the line, you will immediately crumble. A formation is the same: when it is forced to its limits, it would automatically collapse." And as if they were an explanatory note for his words, thunderous booms were heard when he had just finished his words. The great formation had collapsed on its own, and those fierce beasts had all exploded one after another. Though Ling Han did not know this formation of a different system, he could be considered a grandmaster in terms of formations, and all formations had one common characteristic, and that was that they all had upper limits. Once you broke this upper limit, the formation would naturally be broken. Boom, the great formation collapsed. In the distance, the large man whose upper body was bare was revealed to their eyes. He looked completely dumbfounded. Though he had heard Ling Han's explanation, he did not feel that his doubts had been answered at all. Instead, he looked like he had seen a ghost. "Are you a freak?" It sounded simple, but to be able to force a formation to its upper limit, one would first have to be able to sustain the power of the great formation before that limit was reached. Even the tribe's several elders were unable to accomplish that. Even the tribal chief could not. This young outsider actually had battle prowess on the level of the tribal chief. This was too terrifying. Ling Han stretched out a hand and grabbed that man over, and asked, "Have you been bitten by a dog or something? Why do you hate outsiders so much?" The reason why he had such a guess was because the large black dog and the others had all entered here, and with how despicable that dog was, it would not be a strange thing for this large man to suffer a bit. Just after he said this, he saw that the large man actually flushed bright red, seeming to feel both humiliated and furious. "This?" Ling Han couldn't help but laugh. His guess had actually been on the mark. "Don't laugh!" The large man roared loudly, and tried to kill Ling Han as if he had put his life on the line. Yet he only had the battle prowess on the level of a great saint, so how could he possibly be a match for Ling Han? Ling Han casually pressed down a hand. "Pa!" That man was instantly pressed onto the ground, his limbs stretched out, forming the Chinese character. "Release me, or all of you will be dead!" The large man was very arrogant because this was the territory of the Zhao tribe. In their own territory, whom did he have to fear? There were a total of 27 9-ring peak stage elites, and any one of them would be able to match this young outsider. Ling Han smiled slightly and said, "Even a captured prisoner dares to be so arrogant. Looks like you haven't had enough suffering yet. Whatever I ask, you just have to answer. Otherwise, ho-ho, just pray for luck then." "You dare!" the large man shouted. The great formation had already collapsed, so there would definitely be people coming from the tribe immediately. What did he have to fear? Ling Han smiled calmly, and said to the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden and Long Yushan, "The two of you, turn your heads around." The Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden immediately did as he said, while Long Yushan curiously asked, "Why?" "Pa!" Ling Han flicked out a finger, and the clothing on the large man immediately burst to pieces. In the beginning, his upper body was already bare, and now he had become completely naked. Long Yushan hurriedly turned her head around, but her pretty face was incredibly red with embarrassment. She really wanted to pinch Ling Han severely a few times. What are you doing?" The large man's face had already turned livid. He was a great 9-ring elite, yet his clothes had actually been destroyed by another, showing something that was not appropriate to be seen. He was too embarrassed. "So small," Ling Han evaluated. "So small," Xiao Gu repeated. The large man was about to pass out. Being naked in public was bad enough, and they were still assessing his D***CK? Furthermore, you guys had gone too far. You were even parroting each other's words. This was no way to insult another person. This was practically even crueler than that despicable dog. Ling Han smiled slightly. "Are you willing to answer questions now? Ho-ho, otherwise it would not be an evaluation that is coming after. I will hang you up and send you back to your tribe so everyone can observe your precious sword." "No!" the large man exclaimed in a trembling voice. If that happened, how would he still have the face to see other people in the future? "Then just honestly answer the questions," Ling Han stated calmly. "How many groups of outsiders have you encountered here in total?" "Just one group," the large man hurriedly answered, having lost any intention of resisting. "Who were they?" Ling Han asked further. "There were a lot of them, at least 100. Tell me the details." When he heard the large man explain in detail, only then did Ling Han find out that 4.5 years ago, the Empress and the others had come here. Indeed, there had also been the Saint Kings from the Forbidden Lands with them, as well as some juniors, and they totaled up to about 100 people. The large black dog had also been among them, and they, just like Ling Han's group, had had a smooth journey in the beginning, but had been stopped when they had come here. The large black dog had even clashed with this man. It had quietly hidden inside the formation, and bitten off a chunk of flesh from this guy's bottom. Afterwards, through some negotiations, the Empress and the others were allowed to pass, and that large man also nurtured an extreme hatred for all outsiders. Now, Ling Han and his group had encountered him, so they naturally would suffer from him deliberately making things difficult for them. But the end result was that he experienced the second great loss that he had ever had in his lifetime. "Outsiders, you have gone too far!" At this time, the elites of the Zhao tribe had also rushed here, and they all glared at Ling Han and his group with menacing eyes. Chapter 1657 Ransom. Chapter 1657 Ransom. The Zhao tribe mobilized a total of 6 elites. This clearly was not their full strength. They probably thought that this would be enough to suppress Ling Han and his group. Ling Han was internally displeased. His eyes swept over them, and he declared, "You guys had better not trifle with me, or he won't be the only person lying here. How dare you! The 6 of them rebuked at the same time. Though they were not elders, every single one of them could be called a 9 Rings elite, being comparable to the early stage, or even middle stage of Saint King tier. Capture him! The 6 of them moved, and attacked Ling Han in unison. Ling Han casually grabbed the large man from before, holding his ankle. Using him like a weapon, he smashed him into the 6 elites. He brandished the human staff in a powerfully imposing manner. The large man's expression had turned green from fear. He hurriedly channeled his strength throughout his body. Otherwise, if he was hit or struck by his clansmen, he would definitely be crushed into a bloody mush. And those 6 had no choice but to leap aside and dodge to avoid wounding their clansmen by accident. Fighting with a hostage in hand, what kind of man are you? They provoked. None of your business! Ling Han gave a battle cry, and charged towards the 6 of them with his powerful weapon, wielding the large man like he was holding a sword. He actually did manage to channel sword chi through him, and it was continuously surging out of the large man's body. This caused the large man to suffer. Even if he focused all his power on defense, how could he possibly bear Ling Han's sword intent? Lacerations immediately formed in his flesh, and he was badly mutilated. Ling Han was fired up from the fight, and casually tossed the large man to one side. Then, he charged into the group of 6. Pun. Throwing out punches and kicks, he soon suppressed the 6 of them. With his extreme speed, there was no one that could manage to escape. Xiao Gu watched from the sidelines, its head slanted to one side. At present, it was like a sponge, continuously absorbing everything around it, and in its heart, Ling Han clearly had the greatest influence on it, so every move and gesture it had was a copy of Ling Han's. Ling Han stood, his hands crossed behind his back. Since things had reached this point, he did not want to easily stop, either. After a while, more elites came from the Zhao tribe. There were even more this time round, and had reached 100. Ling Han couldn't help but feel rueful. There really were a lot of elites here. These 100 people were all 9 Rings elites, and there were even over a dozen of them whose 9 rings were all black as ink. They had reached the level of peak stage Saint King. Seeing so many fated enemies, Xiao Gu's eyes had already turned green. Thankfully, it still remembered Ling Han's words. It lowered its head, and did not make any move, nor did it allow others to discover its unusual state. Its intelligence was gradually increasing, also becoming more human-like. Release the hostages! An old man who wore a feathered crown that was 15 meters tall spoke up. Hi's feathered crown was the longest. Clearly, he was the chief of the Zhao tribe. His face was ice cold, his eyes burning with flames of rage that blazed like lightning. Ling Han shook his head, and answered, "Old man, I do not like your commanding tone. Change your attitude before you speak again. You're courting death." An elder moved. Hong, as a giant hand stretched out, multiple black vein patterns appeared, and the sun, moon, and stars could vaguely be seen, but it was a completely different cultivation technique from the ancient realm. Ling Han shot out his own punch, striving against the incoming attack, and not backing down the slightest bit. Boom! After the clash, that elder's figure wavered, and he revealed a sliver of surprise in his expression. In his eyes, Ling Han's aura was considerably weaker than his own. Previously, he had exchanged blows with outsiders, so even though they did not belong to the same system of cultivation, it helped him to make a judgment of Ling Han's strength. But this exchange of blows was far beyond his expectations. The other party was actually not the slightest bit weaker than himself. Ahem! The chief of the Zhao tribe opened his mouth. He stretched out a hand and made a pressing gesture with it, signaling that elder not to make any further moves. He said, "Outsider, if you want to ask for passage, we will allow you to pass. Release the hostages immediately, and make your apologies to us, in accompaniment with some gifts to show your apology." "Chief!" all the elders exclaimed in shock. Wasn't this letting them off too lightly? The Zhao tribe's chief shook his head slightly, and softly said, "Focus on the greater picture. Recently, they were mulling over starting a war with the Lang tribe, and they naturally could not allow any unexpected events to take place at this point in time. After all, Ling Han had already proven that his strength could not be underestimated. All the elders were extremely angry, but did not voice out any more objection. They all secretly decided that when Ling Han and his group returned, they would definitely teach them a lesson. He wanted to explore the secret of the source of the upper course. He had to be delusional. All the ancestors of the various tribes had long since worked together to explore that place, but they were not allowed to approach at all. Forcefully barging in would only lead to death, and the final result for Ling Han and his group of outsiders would only be to come back the same way they had come. They all looked at Ling Han. These people were really let off too lightly. They would be allowed to live a few more days. Ling Han shook his head and said, "Please do not misunderstand. I have not come to ask for passage. These 7 people are presently all hostages, so name your offer. If I am satisfied with the price, I will return them to you. Otherwise, they will be killed on the spot, freshness guaranteed." "You actually dare to blackmail us?" All the elites of the Zhao tribe were furious, and even the chief of the Zhao tribe had a dark expression as he revealed a menacing killing intent. His previous compromise had not been because he was afraid of Ling Han, but rather because he had not wanted to effect the planned attack against the Lang tribe. Was he seeking death? "Take him down," the Zhao tribe chief commanded coldly, having finally lost all his patience. "Sixth, let's attack together." An elder walked out. He was the 7th elder of the Zhao tribe, and was brothers with the 6th elder. The 2 of them working together also had the best coordination. "All right." The 6th elder also walked out. The 2 of them stood side by side, staring at Ling Han with eyes filled with ice, their faces expressionless, as if Ling Han was already a dead man. Ling Han smiled slightly, and used the immovable deity metal body mystical power. 6 arms stretched out at the same time, grabbing the 6 hostages on the ground, wielding them like weapons. "Come on, then. This? You are too shameless, actually using the hostages as weapons. Furthermore, it is already bad enough that you grabbed 2 of them, but you actually grabbed 6 of them. If it wasn't because you only have 6 arms, would you also be grabbing that last hostage?" This thought also streaked through Ling Han's mind. He couldn't help but think, since he could form 4 additional arms, then could he advance a step further, and have this number reach as many as 6, 8, or even more? He could give it a try. Perhaps he would have to spend endless time on it, but it was worth the attempt, wasn't it? The 6th elder and 7th elder did not move for fear of harming the hostages, and did not dare to make any moves at all. They only stood there, looking at Ling Han dumbly. He had never seen such a shameless person. Ling Han said, "If we're not fighting, then let's discuss the ransom. If it's too low, then don't blame me for killing the hostages." All the elites of the Zhao tribe looked livid, but even if it was easy for elites to appear here, there were still very few that had reached 9 rings. They belonged to talent that could definitely not be allowed to be lost, because there were still other tribes further down the river course that were eyeing them hungrily. If their strength was the slightest bit weakened, they would launch an offensive against them without hesitation, and replace them. Some had only been defeated, and retreated further down the river course, but there were some that had directly been wiped out, and disappeared in the passage of history. 100 top-grade godly medicines, the Zhao tribe chief said, and he threw a large pile of godly medicines with a wave of his right hand in front of him. Because there was an extremely large amount of them, one could visibly see the clear interweaving of divine light among them. Yet Ling Han scoffed and said, "Do you think I am a beggar? You just plan to dismiss me with such paltry things?" These godly medicines were only level 16 at most. He suddenly moved, and tore off the arm of a hostage, which he tossed at the elites of the Zhao tribe. Chapter 1658 Exchange. Chapter 1658 Exchange. For elites, regrowing a severed arm was not a big deal, but Ling Han doing such a thing was to tell them that he had no scruples. He dared to tear off his arm now, and he would dare twist off his head next. "What do you want?" the Zhao tribe chief asked coldly, and they could clearly feel that he had seriously been angered by now. Once they managed to retrieve the hostages, he would kill Ling Han. The war with the Lang tribe could be set aside first. The Zhao tribe had never been bullied like this by anyone before. If their anger could not be vented, then there would be no need for their survival any longer. The other elders also had the same thoughts. You can be as arrogant as you like now, but you will definitely be crying later. Ling Han thought for a moment, and then answered, 10 saintly medicines! Impossible! The Zhao tribe chief immediately shook his head. He had to be joking. Did he think that saintly medicines were as common as cabbages in the field? Even if there were abundant resources here, saintly medicines were still incredibly precious. Ling Han compromised and said, 7. 1 in exchange for each person. You guys won't say that a saint is not even worth a saintly medicine? The elites of the Zhao tribe all knew that saints meant 9 rings elites. They naturally would not say no. In truth, even with the help of the Great River, becoming a Ning Rings elite was still very, very difficult, and the chances of success would be considerably increased with the help of saintly medicine. At most 1, the Zhao tribe chief declared resolutely. There were only a total of 3 saintly medicines in the tribe, and they were only medium saint tier. Ling Han looked at his expression, and knew that this was already his limit. Furthermore, if it was not because he was planning to snatch back the saintly medicine after he rescued the hostages, he would not be willing to even make such a compromise. He smiled and said, 1 saintly medicine is too little, throw another 6 saintly materials into the bargain. Fuck. The elites of the Zhao tribe were all furious. You really aren't reserved at all, huh? You think saintly medicine and saintly material are things that can be found anywhere? The Zhao tribe chief paused for a while, yet still nodded, and answered, 'Fine.' He was unwilling to hand out more saintly medicines because he worried that Ling Han would consume it. Then, even if they killed Ling Han, and split open his stomach, they would not be able to retrieve the saintly medicine. The loss would be too massive, but saintly material was different. Would he be able to consume it? Putting aside the question of consuming it, even if it was thrown onto the ground, it would be undamaged. In that case, so what if they gave it to him? They would be giving in this moment, and getting it back in the next. All the elders also immediately thought of this, and made no further objections. Let's exchange, then. The Zhao tribe chief drew out a saintly medicine and 6 pieces of saintly material, which he tied together with his spiritual power, and pushed towards Ling Han. Ling Han also used his origin power to tie up the 7 hostages, whom he then pushed towards the side of the Zhao tribe chief. The 2 sides let go at the same time. Ling Han immediately drew the saintly medicine and saintly material into the Black Tower. With the help of another saintly medicine, he would be able to shrink the time needed to advance into the Great Saint tier by a considerable few times. Once he had advanced into the Great Saint tier, who would be a match for him in the entire ancient realm? Move! The Zhao tribe chief was the first to pounce, launching an offensive at Ling Han. As his spiritual power was channeled, multiple black patterns appeared on his whole body. They were completely incompatible with the ancient realm. It could be imagined that if he ever left this place, he would definitely be targeted by the heaven and earth. Even the people of the netherworld would have their netherworld regulations erased if they ever went to the immortal realm, what more when this was a completely different cultivation system. Perhaps this was also why none of the natives had ever left even when the mystery realm had clearly been open for quite a few years. If they left this place, even 9 Rings elites could possibly be unable to sustain even a single blow, because it was possible that even their power would be erased. Ya! Xiao Gu released a furious roar. It had already held back for a very long time, but now that so many elites had revealed an aura that it despised, they had finally pushed its self-restraint to its limits. Wang, it released a green light, which became an attack that shot towards the Zhao tribe chief. Green light! Destroyer! When the elites of the Zhao tribe saw this, they immediately gasped in shock. Recently, there had been rumors that the legendary destroyer had appeared. They had thought nothing of it, and thought that it was only complete nonsense that had been passed down from the ancient times. But now? The myth had become reality. Charge! Their killing intent immediately blazed. According to the legends, the person that could use green light would bring devastating disaster to all the tribes. All of you, step aside! Ling Han said to the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden and the others so that they would not be captured by the Zhao tribe and used to threaten him. And the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden and the others all stepped back. They were all saints, so if they were well prepared, they could break into a run and open the path at any time. Then, aside from Ling Han, who had cultivated extreme speed, there was no other existence that could be a threat to them. Ling Han and Xiao Gu joined forces, battling the elites of the Zhao tribe fiercely. This time, the number of elites from the Zhao tribe had far exceeded the Yuan tribes. There were more than 20 elites with peak stage Saint King level battle prowess, and added with the power boost, their battle prowess was even more frightening. Even such big shots like the Blue Feather Saint King would pale in shock, and could only turn and flee. But compared with the battle with the Yuan tribe, Ling Han had already become considerably stronger, advancing from the peak of the middle stage of medium Saint Tier to the peak stage of medium Saint Tier, while his battle prowess had reached peak stage Saint King, and added with the killing formations, he, too, was far stronger than any ordinary peak stage Saint King. Xiao Gu was already exerting its full effort. It had drawn out its true form, a crystalline white bone which was exuding a green light, and had terrifying destructive power. But even when Ling Han used all his techniques, the two of them were still at a disadvantage. There were really too many elites from the opposing side, which had reached the extent of a qualitative change, and there were even more elites joining the battle, while the great formation was also being recovered. The circumstances were becoming more and more unfavorable for Ling Han and his group. A thought flashed in Ling Han's head, and he immediately leaped back. Using lightning flash, there was no one that was capable of stopping him at all. He stretched out a hand and pressed down on the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden and the others. Don't resist. These words were spoken to Long Yushan. Xiao Xiao. The Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden and the Notionless Saint were immediately drawn into the Black Tower, but Long Yushan was not. She was a saint, so she instinctively would have resistance towards others' will. Ling Han did not bother to waste his breath. He directly moved to knock her out, then destroyed her spatial god tool, and released Long Xiangyue. Without waiting for the latter to speak, he did the same to her that he did to her aunt, and drew both women into the Black Tower. If Long Xiangyue knew, she would definitely be very depressed because no matter what Ling Han did to her, how could she possibly resist? Ling Han charged back, and exclaimed, Xiao Gu, don't resist! He wanted to take Xiao Gu into the Black Tower as well, but he could not, because he was unable to wrap Xiao Gu in his divine sense. It was as if the other's whole body was covered with sharp spikes. The slightest touch, and he would be covered all over with wounds. Xiao Gu looked at him blankly. What was the meaning of don't resist? It could not understand these words. Ling Han frowned, and declared, Let's go! Xiao Gu could understand these words, and it immediately ran off with Ling Han. It might be cute, but it was not dumb at all. It could still understand the difference between strength and weakness. If they were outmatched, it was natural that they would have to run. In future, they could still come back to redeem their pride. Ling Han grabbed Xiao Gu, and rapidly broke through the siege using lightning flash and fled. Even if there were more than 100 saint-level elites surrounding them, it was useless. In front of his extreme speed, numbers had completely lost their meaning. Ah! Behind them, the furious shouts of the elites of the Zhao tribe rang out. Even in such a situation, they still managed to flee. Ling Han smirked internally. This time, it was him fleeing, but when he had digested that saintly medicine, and advanced into the great saint tier, he would make a powerful comeback. By that time, you bastards just wait to be pummeled. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.